I take a second to get the live stream going. I say that so that you know that no matter what happens in this final round, it'll be forever immortalized on Blakely YouTube, so that future generations of students can watch the final round of the Hicks Thomas death match. So that's why it took me 7. But look, you guys survived it. Congratulations to all of you. Very, very proud. First and foremost, we have to thank Hicks Thomas. Because of them, we're able to do this, feed y'all, give you stuff, make sure that you're comfortable. From Hicks Thomas, we have Robin Harrison, Steve Barrick, and our coach, Casey Chadwick. So thank y'all so much. Sponsoring it so that we do things like trophies and awards, not trophies, but awards. they know not to get too excited about awards, because their mock trial director likes to do things like just paint things and say, here's a trophy. Which I did not do this time. Before we get into the award part, which I know you guys are really, really excited about, but we do have to thank all of your coaches, because all of your coaches are lawyers in their first, second, third year of practice who've taken time out to spend with you guys to get you ready in 2.5 weeks for this. So it is, I feel like I should do this right and recognize you all. As soon as I pull it up, I was looking at other stuff. So give me 1 second. Man, I know some of y'all are here, but if I just pull up a list, I should just take the ones that are. Just make no, because Amanda Blonde is not here unless she really wants to be. So Amanda Blonde and Jamie, Jamie Rios, AJ Foreman, William McMichael, Eric Sundin, Derek Whitmire, Chelsea Klump, Jackie Riff, Molly Bagshaw, Alex Karina, Jesse Packard, and Brittany Zinsmeyer. I heart all of you. 12 of them are former mock trial alumni from the University of Houston. So this is how they give back, and that gives you all hope that when you graduate, you too can give back and be super competitive and make side bets with some of your colleagues. I don't judge about that. I have made many bets on y'all.
So you're saying there's derivatives?
I'm just saying. So before I announce the winners of stuff, I do also have to say the point of this was well served, because there are coaches, and I told you this yesterday, but it bears repeating. There are coaches, there are former judges, people who judged all over and over again, who may have not seen you in 6 months, may have not seen you in a year, and have all been amazed, impressed. The awards part is really tricky because it was really, really close, which means you guys are all right up there with each other, and it literally comes down to a matter of preference. There are rounds where, like, on one ballot, a lawyer was voted #1 attorney, and on another ballot, it was #4. And literally, that's what I mean by, I feel like we have done our job as your coaches, training you, getting you ready, that you guys are all up there together, and it's literally like, who does this judge prefer on any given day, on any given round? So that means you guys are all doing exactly what we want you to do, which is amazing things, going out there. Huge shout out to Danny, who just literally tried an entire thing. That is also another thing that one day we would love to prepare you for, which is, hey, here's a file, there's a tournament going in 2 days, who wants to go compete? And I want like everybody to go, I can do that, that's easy, that'll be fun. So these are the goals for us, for you. But again, super proud of all of you. And I have to say that many, many times, because I can't give trophies and awards to all of you, even though a lot of you deserve it, you know, but that's just the reality of it. So we got to start the final round. Outstanding witness. I give an outstanding witness award because I think it's very, very important for y'all to remember how important witnessing is, and because it matters. And so a lot of times people will go like, witnessing, whatever. It's like, no, it matters, because your preparation, how you handle yourself on cross, all of that matters. Preparation is everything. So the winner of outstanding witness, who can say it's a depth door. I say, I'm super fancy. A Sharpie and a bottle of gin. It goes to Casey Borthwick. If you were the #1 ranked attorney in your round, you got 1 point. And same thing, 2, 3, 4, and whoever had the lowest score at the end for their 6 ballots is who gets the award. And the winner of the Outstanding Plaintiffs Award for the Death Match, 2022 Death Match, is Mike Danella. That's awesome. Outstanding defense attorney. Oh, this one was really close, and I will tell you that it was really close to a couple of y'all, and y'all kept, some of y'all very talented attorneys would like swipe ballots, like it go back and forth 1, 2 or 1, 3, and so it was a very close one. But the Outstanding Defense Attorney Award goes to Laura Gomez Duarte. Give this Hicks.
I'm so armored.
So the team that made it into the final round. I just so you know what it is. Oh, who's related? Because you were such a close call. You're playing for flasks, which you have to fill on your own.
Oh.
Not my problem.
But it's almost the case.
The 2 teams that made it into the final round actually made it in. So nobody went 4-0. So just to be clear, so nobody went 4-0. Nobody swept the whole thing. The 2 teams that made it in the final round both went in with the exact same record. They went in 3-1 and 8-4 on ballots. So they have the exact same record. It is Toys or Guns and Deaths by Death Store.
Yeah.
So, because you guys have the exact same record, and you guys did not compete against each other, which is weird because there's only 6 of you and it's a 4-round tournament. There's only 1 team that each of y'all aren't going to meet. Well, the team that y'all ended up not meeting was to the end of the finals. It comes down to a coin flip to decide who's going to go what. And I actually grabbed a coin.
May I recommend a quick draw competition?
All right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Judge Wayne's
Yeah, we can go.
Wait, when did you go against each other?
I'm fresh.
Yesterday morning.
So wait, what side did you go?
I win.
Toys R Guns went defense and
State the duty.
That's why that's source plaintiff, yeah.
So we flipped.
You flipped it.
Oh, okay.
It's that easy. You guys flipped it.
The story is mine.
It's that easy.
Because they already went.
So that means, wait, so Toys R Guns was going Plaintiff?
Go?
Yes. Toys R Guns going, Brett, you got a lawyer.
Brett, get back on here.
He was watching.
So, Brett is not able to attend here, but he will be counsel for plaintiffs. He will be doing it over Zoom. Try to weigh him the same he would be if he was walking and talking live and in person, even though I know it's really hard to do that. So, I love all of you, but all of you that are here need to not.
Get out.
You can stay and watch in the gallery, but I need everybody on the plaintiff's team. Everybody on the
Hey,
Yeah. Do you mind if I move the chairs, Georgia? Do you mind if I move the chairs?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
All right, the Honorable Donna Roth presiding.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let's all be seated. Hi, everybody here. Right. Let me start by saying congratulations to you all at this time. And I am going to go ahead and call the case of Judy Green personal representative of the estate of Bill Green versus Jan Alexander. If I can go ahead and get the announcements of the council, beginning with plaintiff's counsel.
Good afternoon, Judge Roth. Brett Hargis, joined by my co-counsel Georgia Bauer on behalf of the plaintiff Judy Green.
Yes, Your Honor, I'm Georgia Bauer.
Tell me your last name,
Bauer, B-A-U-E-R.
and you are Mr. Hargis's co-counsel.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. For the defendant,
Yes, Your Honor, we are the defense side. Our team name is Death by Death's Door. I'm speaker number 1, John Wilson.
And Your Honor, for the defense side, Death by Death's Door again, speaker number 2, Karina Sanchez, Karina Sanchez.
okay, thank you. Are there any pre-trial motions that need to be handled at this time?
Your Honor, plaintiff has a few housekeeping matters as well as a motion in limine in 3 parts.
May I proceed?
Your Honor, may we assume that the witnesses have been pre-sworn?
Yes,
May we assume the exhibits have been pre-marked?
pre-marked, yes.
Your Honor, due to the unusual nature of this hybrid trial, may we assume for the purposes of screen sharing that be done outside the presence of the jury until asked to publish?
Yes,
And lastly, Your Honor, as you know, pursuant,
I hear you. Do you know that?
That's kind of, yeah, we've been trying to fix it, Judge Roth, I apologize.
And
It's-
you're echoing.
yeah, I don't know what it is. It's weird, I can hear him clearly here in the gallery, so like the gallery speakers seem to be working. The speakers closer into the courtroom is not working as well.
Mr. Hargis sounds like he's underwater.
I don't know what to tell you.
Okay, we'll muffle through it. It's just, if I ask you to repeat a lot, that's the reason why.
I'll try to fix it during a break. Let me see what I can do.
We'll see where we're gonna go. Okay, anything else, Mr. Hargis?
yes, Your Honor, as you know, pursuant to Rule 51 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, the jury instructions may be read prior to or after closing arguments. For the sake of today's trial, we ask that those be read prior to closing arguments.
We're gonna do it after closing arguments. What's next?
That concludes our housekeeping, Your Honor. We just have a motion in limine in 3 parts.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else on, let's handle your motion in limiting now.
Yes, Your Honor. As you know, this is a case where the defendant, Jan Alexander, was negligent in serving and providing alcohol to her intoxicated guests, including Chris O'Malley, who was holding the gun.
Alleged that she's negligent.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay,
Alleging that the defendant was negligent in creating an unreasonably safe environment for her guests, these things leading to the death of the decedent, Bill Green. Your Honor, there is an Exhibit 4 in the trial packet that is a settlement agreement between the plaintiff, Judy Green, and Chris O'Malley, who is a witness we will call today. Now, per section 19.531 of the Lone Star Civil Practice and Remedies Code, which is located on page 5 of the trial packet, the jury is not to be informed of any fact or amount of settlement between any parties prior to trial. Therefore, we ask that there be no mention of this Exhibit 4 or the fact that there was a settlement between the plaintiff and Miss O'Malley.
any response?
Yes, Your Honor. While substantive matter, section 19.531, the one that counsel just mentioned, does say that there should be no mention. As you also know, it's stipulated that the federal rules of evidence govern throughout today's trial. As you know, under Erie, Hanna, and Sivak, it's been established that when there's a conflict of law between federal and state, that the federal dominates as to choice of law whenever it has to do with procedural matters. As you know, with the federal rules of evidence 408, settlement is allowed as evidence so long as it's not brought to prove fault or validity of, so long as it's not brought to prove validity of the settlement or the amount of the settlement. We only intend on bringing this for purposes of bias, Your Honor.
Okay, so explain to me how the witness is going to, how do you intend to use it? What's the relevance?
Yes, Your Honor. So Mr. O'Malley is a witness for plaintiff's side, and he was the person who shot Mr. Green that day. He has a settlement with the plaintiff, and that is why he is here for today's trial. He
I
has,
understand, but how is that settlement relevant to whether or not Ms. Alexander was negligent?
Your Honor, it goes to bias. It's only being used for bias as to the witness's credibility, which under Rule 613, we are allowed to use for impeachment, Your Honor.
Has he said there is no settlement?
Your Honor, in the deposition, it does not say that he doesn't have a settlement, Your Honor.
As I recall reading his deposition, it says that he admits to the settlement.
Yes, Your Honor, correct.
The motion in limiting is granted. What's next?
Yes, Your Honor. Per local rules, we are only allowed to call 2 witnesses today, Chris O'Malley and Pat Collins. We are unable to call Judy Green, the plaintiff. Therefore, we just ask that there be no improper argument by counsel about Ms. Green not testifying for a reason that she is somehow disinterested or doesn't want to be here. Your Honor, as we believe this would be unfairly prejudicial under Rule 403, and there's no probative value to counsel arguing that.
Ms. Sanchez, is that agreed to?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, next.
Lastly, Your Honor, we expect the defense to get into testimony about a prior aggravated assault of Miss O'Malley that occurred in 2005. This involved Miss O'Malley pulling a gun on a gentleman in a bar. Your Honor, this would be improper impeachment by criminal conviction under Rule 609 because it occurred well more than 10 years ago. And further, this would be improper character evidence under Rule 404B, as this could only be used to show a propensity argument that she did it once, she must have done it again.
I'm sorry, is it O'Malley? O'Malley's the shooter, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Do you have any objection to that?
Yes, Your Honor. As to the 404 objection being made, we do object. We don't plan on using this as for propensity for the weekend in question. Rather, we just plan on bringing it for knowledge. Mrs. O'Malley knew that she wasn't allowed to have a firearm, possess a firearm in any sense because of this felony conviction. We don't plan on getting into the actual details of the 2005 incident, Your Honor, merely the knowledge of the fact that she wasn't allowed to possess a firearm.
Okay, that'll be granted as well. Anything else?
That concludes our motion in limine, Your Honor. We're ready to proceed to opening.
Thank you. Plaintiff, defendant have anything on housekeeping?
Yes, Your Honor. We would request the court's permission to move about the well, Your Honor, throughout today's trial.
It's granted.
We would also request that for purposes of approaching the bench, may we approach constructively outside the presence of the jury for today's trial.
Granted.
That's it for housekeeping, Your Honor.
Okay, do you have a motion in limiting?
Yes, Your Honor, in
You
3
may
parts.
proceed.
Yes, as to the first one, we anticipate that in today's trial, plaintiff will try to bring about evidence as to a recall of the Ruger gun that was used by Mrs. O'Malley in the shooting. As you know, this is a case about negligence, and defense has brought their own affirmative defenses in today's case. We're alleging that there is not only negligent of self as to Mr. Green, there is negligent of other as to Mrs. O'Malley. We anticipate that plaintiff might try to bring this evidence that there was a recall for that specific serial number of the gun. And as you know, under Rule 407, evidence of subsequent remedial measures can't be used.
In a products liability case. This is not a products liability case, is that correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Okay, response?
Your Honor, we don't plan to get it.
Sure, I think maybe I have the parties confused. You represent the defendant, Jan Alexander, who's being sued under the dram shop provision in this state, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And so, okay, and you want to keep the recall out
Yes, Your Honor.
to show that this might have, the recall doesn't kind of seem that this was an accident, couldn't be prevented and.
Your Honor, the recall was asked to Mrs. O'Malley's gun, which was the shooter in question, and we're trying to prove fault of Mrs. O'Malley as well as fault of Mrs. Green, forgive me.
Okay, response?
I have no objection, Judge.
Okay. Then it'll be out.
Yes, Your Honor, and as to the second one, Your Honor, as you know, a claim of alleged negligence has been brought against my client, Mr. Alexander. And as you also know, the standard of care in this district is ordinary care of a prudent, reasonable person. We anticipate that information about alcoholism as it relates to both Charlie Alexander, Mr. Alexander's little brother, and Mrs. O'Malley, the shooter in question, will be brought in. Your Honor, we believe that any information being brought in as to alcoholism not only isn't relevant, it would serve just to prejudice the jury against my client, Mr. Alexander, and heighten the standard of care in today's trial.
Your response?
Yes, Your Honor. As to the alcoholism of Ms. O'Malley, it is relevant here today. And we're not trying to heighten the standard of care in any way, but the fact that it was present and that Mr. Alexander knew about Ms. O'Malley's alcoholism, that goes to the person of ordinary prudence under same or similar circumstances. The fact that he knew about the alcoholism goes to him providing a reasonably safe environment for his guests under the same or similar circumstances, which an ordinary person would take into account.
Okay, so here's the way, this is gonna be kind of a split ruling. You are not going to be able to talk about the fact that he's an alcoholic or that he suffers from alcoholism, but that he has been treated for, in rehab for alcohol. You may discuss.
Understood.
There'll be no reference to him as an alcoholic or suffering from alcoholism. Anything further?
Yes, Your Honor. Finally, as to our third motion would be, as you know, Mr. Alexander is also the chief of police of Masonville, which was a jurisdiction, which goes within this jurisdiction, Your Honor. We anticipate that plaintiff, aside from bringing about Mr. Alexander's occupation, will try to insinuate testimony that because Mr. Alexander is chief of police, he had a higher standard of care. Again, it's a standard of care for an ordinary person in same or similar circumstances. Mr. Alexander wasn't on duty that weekend, nor should he be unfairly prejudiced by the jury because of his position, whether it's knowingly or unknowingly, Your Honor.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. We have no intention of trying to heighten the standard of care in any way, but the fact that Mr. Alexander is the chief of police is relevant today because their second witness that they will call is Officer Mo Valdez, who works directly under Mr. Alexander and was the one that investigated the scene that night. Your Honor, the testimony from Mr. Valdez will show that instead of giving this to the sheriff's department, the two of them decided that they would still be able to handle this investigation despite it being on Mr. Alexander's land. Therefore, this just goes to the credibility of both Mr. Alexander and Officer Valdez, but it would not be used in any way to heighten, no arguments would be made to try to heighten the standard of care in any way, Your Honor.
Okay, Ms. Sanchez, I'm not really sure. What is it that you're trying to limit out? What testimony are you limiting?
Your Honor, we anticipate that throughout the plaintiff's witnesses today and possibly also on cross, plaintiff will try to bring about information of the scope of Mr. Alexander's job and his familiarity with guns and or anything that would a reasonable officer would have done in that situation. That's what we're objecting to, Your Honor.
Okay, we'll take that up as the testimony comes in.
Yes, Your Honor.
Anything else?
That's it, Your Honor.
Okay.
And before we move into opening mag, try something real quick to hopefully fix the audio.
I think I brought this in closer, so it looks
Does
like
that
I
help?
don't have a problem with him, but he's still on the block.
Yeah, let me try something. What's that?
Okay.
It's either gonna work or it's not gonna work.
Have you all, while she's doing this, met the associate judges here in the jury box? Do you all want to take a moment and just tell everybody who you are? Brad, why don't you start?
Sure, I'm Brad Gilde, I'm a price lawyer here in Houston. See you guys.
I'm Steve Barrick, I'm actually an appellate lawyer at Hicks.
Oh, that was good.
I'm also a lawyer.
Casey Chad.
Yeah, that's it.
Your Honor.
Sorry, that wasn't gonna work the way I was hoping it would work. I was hoping to be able to use this as a speaker for the courtroom.
Okay, so I'm gonna put everybody back.
Yeah, put everybody back on. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Experimenting. I was hoping that might work, but hopefully you can understand, Mr. Hargis.
Yeah, putting him closer made him
Clearer view.
surface to the top.
Are y'all able to hear them, yours all right? Okay, I think some of the mics are better back there than they are.
Okay,
Echoing.
we're ready to go. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Your Honor. Defense has prepared an additional
Okay,
bind.
I don't know what you did, but now everybody's echoing.
I think I just put in 2 computers, make sure there's no audio on either computers, but make sure your speakers are off. Audio, Mic's need off and speakers are also off.
That's a lot better now. No echo from my end.
All right, great. I'm going away. Sorry, Judge Roth, for the delay.
No worries, Ms. Sanchez.
Yes, Your Honor, defense has prepared an additional binder if you would need exhibits or any of the laws in today's case, if you didn't bring your own.
I read it, but I didn't bring them, so that would be very helpful. Thank you.
You guys, do you want to go through it?
Thank you so much. Ms. Bauer, are you ready for opening statements?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, let's all be seated. You may proceed.
May I move the podium?
Yes.
Thank you, support.
Yes.
You don't have to be the chief of police to know that guns aren't toys. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Georgia Bauer, and along with my co-counsel Brett Hargis, we represent the plaintiff in this case, Judy Green, who is the representative of the deceased Bill Green. On the weekend of September 26, 2020, Jan Alexander invited 7 people out to a hunting cabin. Among these 7 people were Pat Collins, Chris O'Malley, and Bill and Judy Green. The defendant and their guests arrived at the cabin on Friday evening. They drank wine, they ate dinner, and they socialized. The next morning, everybody split off into different morning activities. Most people slept in, some people went hunting, and the defendant took a trip into town to buy some liquor. It wasn't until the defendant returned to the cabin that this weekend went from ordinary to dangerous. Once the drinks started flowing, a quick draw game broke out among the guests. You're going to hear a lot about this quick draw game today, and you might even hear it called by a few different names. A Wild West shootout, a blood draw, a duel, but they're all talking about the same activity. And there are 2 qualities about this game that are really important. 1, the game used real guns. And 2, those real guns were being pointed at real people. A few minutes into the first round of this game, Mr. Alexander suggested the bare minimum. Everybody unload the guns that they were pointing at each other. The game came to a natural ending and everybody moved on to different activities. Some went to go start dinner, some people were mingling and chatting. And the defendant and Chris O'Malley sat outside together and talked and drank. As they were talking, the defendant watched as Chris O'Malley pushed the magazine into and out of their gun. Loaded and unloaded, in and out, repeatedly as they sat together and talked. Eventually, Bill Green and Pat Collins came outside to join them, and the second round of the game started up. Today, we're going to call to the stand Chris O'Malley and Pat Collins to tell you about what happened next. Both Ms. O'Malley and Ms. Collins will testify that this time, instead of asking her guests to unload the guns, he did something else. Drunk on the liquor that he bought, standing in the yard of his cabin, the defendant watched as their guests picked up guns, pointed them at each other, and walked away. It wasn't until the shot rang out and Bill Green dropped to the ground that it became clear that the defendant in this case cannot walk away from this situation. I want you to listen carefully in this case today. Listen to Ms. Collins, Ms. O'Malley's lifelong best friend, describe to you the shock and devastation on her friend's face as the accidental shot rang out. Listen to Ms. O'Malley describe to you how the defendant pressured and cajoled her to take drink after drink. And listen for the silence. Listen for what the defendant didn't do. Mr. Alexander didn't put a stop to these games even when there was a loaded gun involved. Mr. Alexander didn't move the guns away from the party or the alcohol until after a man had lost his life. But most importantly, listen to the law. You're going to receive detailed jury instructions at the end of this trial today. But for now, it is enough to know that Mr. Alexander had a duty under the law to make his premises and the activities conducted on those premises safe for his guests. That is the law today, and that was the law on the day that Mr. Alexander watched his guests pick up guns, fingers on triggers, and turned his back and walked away. You're going to hear a lot about a burden that we have to prove today, and we will prove that burden. That burden is the preponderance of the evidence. Preponderance of the evidence is not the highest burden in our justice system. It simply means more likely than not. And we will prove by at least a preponderance of the evidence that Jan Alexander negligently failed to make their premises and the activities conducted on their premises safe for his guests. We will also prove today that the defendant negligently served alcohol to visibly intoxicated guests. More likely than not is not beyond a reasonable doubt. You can still have some doubt, but if it is more likely than not that Jan Alexander was negligent, we have satisfied our burden. A man lost his life on September 26, 2020, and we are not taking away from the seriousness and gravity of that fact. However, this is not a murder trial. This is a negligence case. The defense may try to distract you today by talking about the responsibility that everyone has to take about their actions. But it's not your job to teach them about morals and responsibility. There is one person on trial today, and that person is Jan Alexander. The evidence will show that Jan Alexander negligently failed to make their premises safe for their guests in such an extreme way that a man lost their life. You don't have to be the chief of police to know that guns aren't toys. People were drunk and they were pointing loaded guns at each other. Somebody should have stepped in and put a stop to these games. And that person should have been Jan Alexander. But instead of stepping up to her responsibility under the law to make her premises and the activity safe, she turned her back and walked away. We are confident that after you have seen and heard all the evidence in this case, you will come to the only conclusion that all the evidence supports, which is that Jan Alexander was negligent.
Thank you, Ms. Bauer. Who will we open it? Okay, Mr. Wilson, you may proceed.
May it please the court.
Yes, you may proceed.
Plaintiff wants to point the finger at Mr. Alexander, when it was Miss O'Malley who pointed the gun at plaintiff. Members of the jury, my name is John Wilson. Along with my co-counsel, Karina Sanchez, we represent Mr. Jan Alexander. Now, I first want to begin by saying we understand that Mrs. Green is dealing with a terrible loss. It's a tragedy, and we sympathize with her. But you're not here today to make a decision based on sympathy. We're here today to make a decision based on the facts. And the facts will show you that Mr. Alexander is not the monster that plaintiff paints him out to be, but quite the opposite. The chief of police of the city of Masonville, a leader in his community, who has had guests over to this lodge many times before, and not once has there ever been an accident like this. Plaintiff also mentioned a lot of things that Mr. Alexander did that weekend, but left out two very important facts. One, Mr. Alexander, who cuts off Mr. Green when he notices that Mr. Green has been overserved. He took that action. And two, it was Mr. Alexander who stepped in when this gun draw game was going on and made sure that the safeties were on and the magazines were taken out. He took these preventative measures to ensure the safety of his guests. Now, I want to highlight some of the actions that Miss O'Malley took and Mr. Green took to get us to why we're here today. I'll start with Mr. Green. First, you'll discover that he wasn't even invited to the lodge that weekend. His wife was, but he made the decision to come along. It's his first choice, put himself in that environment. Second choice was it was Mr. Green who insisted that harder alcohol be brought for the weekend. It wasn't Mr. Alexander's idea, but Mr. Green. Second choice. Now, only after Mr. Green insists that more alcohol is provided and it shows up the next day, it's Mr. Green who decides to take one of these bottles of alcohol, a full bottle of liquor, and leave the group, leave the rest of the people that weekend, and go off and drink half that bottle away from Mr. Alexander, away from everyone else. Can't stop it. Mr. Green makes that choice. He makes that decision to get very intoxicated. And once he comes back to the group, he makes the decision to go up to Miss O'Malley, the shooter in this case, and directly pick on her, antagonize her, poke at her, rile her up. He makes that decision. He also insists that they engage in a gun draw. It's his idea. You'll learn that she accepts. But before she does, he also thinks it would be a good idea to pour her a drink and offer it to her. You'll learn that it was Mr. Green who gave the final drink to Miss O'Malley. It wasn't Mr. Alexander. Now I'll shift to the choices, decisions, the actions of Miss O'Malley and how they got us to where we are here today. You'll learn that it was Miss O'Malley, Saturday morning, who actually gave money to Mr. Alexander to go purchase her favorite bottle of liquor. That's Duarte. You'll hear that. And once it arrives, Mr. Alexander offers her a drink. She accepts it. She didn't have to. She had a problem with alcohol. She could have said no. She chooses to take that drink and drink it. She also chooses to agree to this gun draw competition. And they draw. And that's why we're here. Now, I highlight all these actions, all these choices, all these decisions, because the defense here also is here to prove something. That these actions, these choices, these decisions by Mr. Green and Miss O'Malley led to the death of Mr. Green, not Mr. Alexander. So throughout this trial, it's quite simple. Just keep a scale in your head. And one side is Mr. Green and Miss O'Malley, and another side is Mr. Alexander. And each choice, each action, each decision that you hear throughout this trial, place weight on one side of the scale, which caused Mr. Green's death more. Because I'm confident at the end of this trial, the side of Mr. Green and Miss O'Malley will weigh far heavier than the side of Mr. Alexander. Throughout this trial, plaintiff will point the finger at Mr. Alexander. Just remember, it's Miss O'Malley pointing the gun.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Hargis, Ms. Bauer, you may call your first witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Plaintiff calls Chris O'Malley to the stand.
Ms. O'Malley? It's my understanding you were being pre-sworn, is that correct? Yes, Judge. Okay, please have a seat. Put the microphone close to you.
Your Honor,
Can you hear me?
yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Your Honor, before I begin my questioning, may we briefly approach to discuss a pretrial ruling?
Yes. Jury is going to be dismissed. How can I help you?
Your Honor, the defense just violated their own MIL about the alcoholism when they said defendant had a problem with drinking yet still chose to drink. I would just ask the court's permission to explore this a little more and Chief Alexander's knowledge.
Okay, I'm sorry. I heard up until they violated by saying he had a problem with alcohol. Then what did you say after that?
that she had a problem with alcohol and still chose to drink. I would just ask the court's permission to explore this a little more as to Mr. Alexander's knowledge of Miss O'Malley's problem with alcohol.
Okay, again, I think the court's ruling is that we can talk about the alcohol or the rehab center, but we're not going to be using terms like alcoholic or alcoholism unless there's a medical expert that's going to be testifying that those terms are appropriate for the witness. And I believe that there is no such expert. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay, you may proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Miss O'Malley.
Good afternoon.
Would you please introduce yourself to the folks of the jury?
My name is Chris O'Malley.
How old are you, Miss O'Malley?
Well, I'm 36 years young.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm a counselor at a rehabilitation facility here in Lone Star.
How did you come to have that job?
Well, in my 20s, I had some issues with alcohol use, and I did a brief stint at this rehab facility. I got my counseling degree there. I got my counseling degree, and I've been working there ever since, almost 10 years now.
Miss O'Malley, do you know the defendant, Jan Alexander?
I do.
How do you know Mr. Alexander?
Mr. Alexander's younger brother, Charlie Alexander, was somebody that I was sponsoring at the rehabilitation facility.
How well would you say you know Mr. Alexander?
Which one?
Excuse me, Mr. Jan Alexander.
The Chief Alexander, I don't know very well, but everyone knows about his reputation in the county.
To your knowledge, was Jan Alexander aware of the problems you've had with alcohol in the past?
Objection calls for speculation, Your Honor.
Lay your foundation if you can.
Yes, Your Honor.
Otherwise, sustained.
Let me back up a minute, Miss O'Malley. To your knowledge, did Mr. Alexander know that you were Charlie's sponsor?
Okay, when we're using the term Mr. Alexander, are we talking about Jan or are we talking about Charlie?
I'll just use.
For the purposes of making it clear for the record and for all of us, we'll refer to them by Charlie and Jan.
Yes, Judge.
Yes, Your Honor. Miss O'Malley, to your knowledge, was Jan aware that you were Charlie's sponsor?
Yes, that's how I met Jan.
Was Jan aware of how you became Charlie's sponsor?
Yes, Jan was aware that I was Charlie's sponsor. That's how Charlie introduced Jan and I.
So to your knowledge, was Jan aware that you had had your own struggles with alcohol in the past?
Yes.
All right. I want to turn now to the weekend of September 25th, 2020. Miss O'Malley, what do you remember about that weekend?
On the 25th, my friend and I, Pat Collins, had been invited to the Alexander's cabin. Both Jan and Charlie were there. And it was my understanding that it was some kind of party weekend to celebrate Charlie.
Do you recall who else was there that weekend?
Most of the friends that were there, I had not met before, as they were Jan's friends.
Who were those friends?
They were two other couples. It was Bill and Judy Green and Amanda and Jerry Wicks.
Okay, now let's talk about that first night, September 25th. What was going on that night when you arrived to the cabin?
That Friday, my friend Pat and I arrived, and it was at the beginning getting to know each other. I'd never met neither the Greens nor the Wicks. So it was introduction, and over dinner, we all got to know each other a little more. There was some drinking, and then we went to bed.
What were people drinking that night?
Wine.
Do you know who provided the wine?
Yes, it was Jan.
Miss O'Malley, were you drinking that night?
No, I was not.
All right, let's turn now to the next day, Saturday, September 26th. What's the first thing you remember about Saturday?
Well, I woke up pretty early. Those that had been drinking the night before had slept in. I remember Charlie and both Amanda and Jerry Wicks had gone hunting. So I just stayed around the cabin until everybody kind of regathered or came back around noon.
What was Jan doing that morning?
First time I saw Jan was around noon. He had come back with a car full of liquor.
You say a car full of liquor. What kind of liquor was this?
Well, he had bought, I believe it was rye, whiskey, gin, and some scotch.
What did Jan do with the liquor when he got back to the cabin with it?
Immediately after he got back to the cabin, he placed the bottles of liquor on a table and set some glasses out.
Did people start drinking?
Not everybody, but some people did indeed start pouring drinks for themselves, including Jan. Jan poured himself, I believe it was whiskey.
Were you drinking at this time?
Not at this time.
So once the people you said have started drinking, what do you remember happening next that day?
I remember my friend Pat Collins went off with Mr. Green, and the rest of us kind of stayed behind, talked a little more. Eventually, we started doing some target shooting.
Some target shooting. Is this shooting guns at targets?
Yes, Charlie had placed some targets out outside the cabin, and those of us that felt comfortable used the guns to shoot at the targets.
Was there drinking going on while the target shooting is happening?
There were people that were drinking while the target shooting was happening, yes.
Where was Jan Alexander when this is going on?
I mean, Jan was among us. He wasn't doing the target shooting, but he was drinking. But we were all around the same location.
Were the guns used for anything else besides target shooting?
Well, after some target shooting, one of Jan's friends started doing kind of a, how would I describe it? Like a quick draw of pulling the gun out of the holster as fast as they could.
Did anybody else engage in this quick draw you just described?
Yes, it kind of it became somewhat of like a game, if you will, of who could pull out the gun out of the holster the fastest. So some of us did start partaking in that.
Okay, let's explore that a little more. When you say other people joined in, is everybody facing the same direction? Explain that to us if you could.
Sure, so there's a group of us out there, myself, Charlie, Jan, and I believe both Wicks, Min and Jerry, were out there. And we were pulling the gun out of the holster as fast as we could. We're all about 4 to 5 feet away from each other. It was pictured like an old Western style movie to see who could do it the fastest.
So are you facing each other when this is happening?
Yes.
Okay, and are the guns still loaded at this point?
Yeah, yes.
What, if anything, does if anything, does Jan Alexander do while this is going on?
Someone, it might have been Jan, recommended that we take any bullets or ammunition outside of the guns and leave them on the picnic table nearby, in addition to putting the safeties on the guns.
Did Jan ever check the barrels of any of the guns to see if there were still bullets in there?
No, I mean, she didn't even get up to check the guns to make sure that any of the bullets or magazines were in there or that the safeties were on. She might have said something, but that was it. Was
the quick draw contest, were they allowed to continue?
Yes, we continued doing the quick draw contest. Nobody was injured, and then the group kind of regathered again.
What's the next thing you remember happening after this?
Well, I remember Pat Collins and Bill Green coming back to join the group around that time outside the cabin.
Are you drinking at this point?
Am I drinking at this point?
Yes.
I might have had a couple shots at this point.
Did you pour those yourself?
No. Jan offered me something to drink. I initially declined, but he kept pouring them, and eventually I took some shots.
How many shots would you say you took that afternoon?
I can't recall an exact number.
Where were Bill and Pat during this?
I believe they were on a hike.
Did they return from that hike at some point that day?
Yes, and that's what I meant by regather. Sorry, I should have been more specific. The group that had been doing the target shooting, we'd been doing that, been outside, and that's when Bill Green and Pat Collins came back to join us after they returned from the hike.
What did they do when they got back?
Well, I mean, there was a little bit of tension. Bill and Pat might have said a couple words to the rest of the group, but they went inside almost immediately after they got there.
Did they come back outside?
They did. They both came back outside.
Who else was outside?
Well, the Wicks had gone inside to make dinner. I went inside for a brief period, but then I came back out. So in the end, I would say Jan, Charlie, myself, Pat, and Bill were outside.
What is Jan doing during this time you just described?
Not much of anything other than drinking.
What happened next?
Well, Bill suggested that we kind of engaged in this old Western style shooting game that we had done earlier. And he was kind of aiming it at me to get me to do it. And initially I said no, I wasn't in the mood. I'd been drinking. So I didn't.
Did you eventually engage in the quick draw?
I did. He got kind of in my face. He poured a drink, put it in front of my face and said, drink, drink, drink. And at this point, I took the drink. I didn't drink it, but I took it and I said, okay, fine, let's do this. Just to get him off my back. I didn't really know him very well. He's one of Jan's friends, but I didn't want it to continue being awkward or this tension.
Where is Jan during this interaction you just described between you and Mr. Green?
I mean, he's still outside watching this, I don't want to say altercation, but watching this exchange between Bill and I.
Did he watch the whole quick draw contest?
No, he left moments before we actually engaged in the contest.
Did he say anything before he left?
He did.
What did he say?
At first he said, this is stupid.
Objection, hearsay, Your Honor.
May I respond, Your Honor? This is a admission by a party opponent, Your Honor.
Mr. Green is not a party to this case. He's deceased.
Your Honor, she was speaking about Mr. Alexander, I believe, Jan.
I'm sorry, who were you talking about, please?
Jan, Your Honor.
Okay, so moved.
What did Jan Alexander say before he left, Ms. O'Malley?
So Jan saw that Bill and I were about to do this, and Jan said, this is stupid. And then he leaned over and told me, I wouldn't take this nonsense from Bill. I'm glad I'm not you, Chris, something like that.
What did Jan Alexander do next?
After telling him that, after Jan telling me that he was glad he wasn't in my shoes, he walked away.
What happened next between you and Mr. Green?
Bill and I, we did the quick draw contest.
What was the result of that?
We both pulled the guns out of our holsters, and unfortunately, something in the gun that I was holding, it discharged, and unfortunately, a bullet from that gun did hit Bill.
I'll pass the witness.
Okay, cross-examination, please, Mr. Wilson.
So Mallory, you shot and killed Mr. Green, didn't you?
Unfortunately, the gun that I was holding, a bullet did hit Mr. Green.
Let me ask.
I didn't intend to shoot him, but yes,
And when this happened, you were drunk.
I was.
Now, you were at Jan Alexander's lodge because you're friends with Charlie.
Yes,
You mentioned on direct, you were his sponsor at the recovery center.
I was.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't a sponsor someone who's supposed to guide those in recovery, supposed to set a good example?
Yes,
And correct, you were drinking that weekend.
that Saturday, not on Friday.
Now, I want to talk about Pat Collins, the person you brought to the lodge.
Sure.
You and her are close.
Yes,
Y'all been friends for 30 years.
yes.
But y'all got in a little disagreement on the way up, didn't y'all?
We might have exchanged some words.
You felt that she likes to stir the pot, doesn't she?
She can.
She likes to be a little dramatic,
She does like to be the center of attention.
and you thought she'd be a good addition to the weekend.
Yeah, I didn't know anyone and she's my childhood friend, so I thought I'd bring someone I did know.
So you went to the lodge with Miss Collins and you all arrived Friday just before dinner.
That's correct.
And when you arrived, you noticed alcohol was there.
Yes.
Was that difficult for you being in recovery?
Everyday recovery is difficult. Unfortunately, that Friday there was drinking, but I was strong that day.
And you actually knew alcohol was gonna be there that weekend before you went, didn't you?
That's correct.
And you still chose to go.
That's correct.
And when you get there and you see the alcohol, you don't say anything to anyone.
No, it wasn't my couch.
You don't say, hey, this makes me uncomfortable.
No.
And at that dinner, you notice that Mr. Green wants stronger liquor there, doesn't he?
I believe he did tell Jan to go purchase harder liquor, yes.
And so, right, the next day, Jan Alexander shows up with hard liquor.
Yes,
You said it was a carload, right?
yes.
It was 4 bottles,
4 bottles of liquor in addition to the wine that was already at the cabin, yes.
and that was Jack Daniels, Knob Creek, Monkey Shoulder, and Death's Door Gin, right?
Sure,
You're familiar with Death's Door Gin, aren't you?
sure.
Back when you used to drink, you liked it.
As an alcoholic, unfortunately, I liked all types of alcohol, yes.
So the liquor arrives and your friend Charlie sets up shooting targets
That was later in that day, yes.
afterward. And during the target practice, y'all decide to start playing a quick draw game, right?
Yes,
And you knew shooting was gonna happen, right?
At
At the lodge?
at the targets?
For the weekend, you knew there was gonna be shooting going on,
Oh,
right?
yeah, I knew that there would be guests, yes.
Right, that's why you brought the Ruger Mark IV, right?
Yes, it was a hunting lodge,
So you knew there was gonna be drinking, you knew there was gonna be shooting.
yes.
So as y'all are doing the quick draw, Jan Alexander actually confronts y'all, doesn't he?
If by confront, you mean he suggests we take out the magazines?
Right, he steps in and makes sure the safeties are on and that the magazines, the ammo with all the bullets are taken out, right?
I mean, he didn't get up to check the guns, but he did suggest we do that.
Yeah. And during this time, your friend Miss Collins and Mr. Green, they're away,
Yes,
but they eventually come back.
yes,
And when they do, they appear intoxicated,
yes,
pretty drunk.
yes.
And at that point, you notice Jan Alexander confront Mr. Green, the intoxicated Mr. Green, right?
I think he might have said something to his friend, yes.
Cuts him off.
Yes,
And after this happened, you mentioned that that's when you began to drink.
yes, I did drink that day.
You mentioned that Jan Alexander essentially pressured you into drinking.
I felt pressure, yes.
You believe in free will.
I mean, I think, there's a God out there and everyone has some kind of fate, but if you're getting at decisions, we can make some decisions, but I don't know if, there's a divine power that already knows exactly what's gonna happen.
When Jan Alexander poured you that drink, you took it from it.
Not the first one, no.
You didn't pick up a drink that Mr. Alexander poured for you?
The first one I initially declined. Eventually I felt pressured and I began to drink.
And you made that choice to drink.
Sure,
You could have said no, right?
sure.
And we mentioned earlier that you're a sponsor. You're supposed to be strong.
I am.
And eventually, Mr. Green, he begins to kind of pick on you.
Later that day after he came back from the height, yes.
And he was wanting you to play the quick draw game with him, wasn't
That's correct.
he? And you agreed.
I did.
You said no.
I could have.
And before y'all face each other, before y'all He'll do it. He pours you a shot,
Yes,
and he offers it to you,
he did.
and you take it, but you don't drink it. And you didn't have anything offered to you afterwards, did you?
Well, right immediately after is when we engage in the gun competition.
Right, after you take that drink from Mr. Green, you'll line up. Right?
Sure.
You'll face each other, and then you draw. That's when the gun you're holding fires, hits Mr. Green. Is that yes?
Unfortunately,
Police arrive, don't they?
yes,
They arrest you for suspicion of homicide.
yes,
Those charges were dropped, weren't they?
I believe they were.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Anything further on redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
See,
Ms. O'Malley, when you woke up on September 26, 2020, did you plan on drinking that day?
No, I did not.
Why did you?
I felt pressured. I felt pressured by Jan. We were in an environment where everyone was drinking, there were guns, and I felt pressured to do so.
When you and Mr. Green are about to have the quick draw contest, did Jan Alexander do anything to stop it?
Absolutely not.
Did he ever move the alcohol away from you?
No.
Did he ever move the guns inside?
No,
Did he ever ask you to take the guns inside?
no, he didn't ask me anything except more offer. He offered me more alcohol. That's it.
No further questions. May this witness step down, Judge?
yes.
At this time, I'd like to call Pat Collins to stand.
Yes,
Yes, Your Honor.
Barry, you may proceed.
Good afternoon. Please state your name for the members of the jury.
Hi, my name's Pat Collins.
Ms. Collins, were you at Jan's cabin the weekend of September 26th?
Yes, I was.
And who owns that cabin?
Mr. Jan Alexander does.
Why were you at that cabin that weekend?
My friend Chris O'Malley invited me to come up with her to have a good time at the lodge.
How do you know Chris O'Malley?
Chris O'Malley and I grew up together. We've been friends for a long time.
What is your relationship like with Chris O'Malley?
You know, it's like any relationship, it has its ups and downs, but you know, she's always been a good friend to me.
And how did you feel about going to the lodge that weekend with Miss O'Malley?
Well, at first I was kind of nervous because I didn't know anyone other than Miss O'Malley, other than Chris, and but I was so excited, you know, just to go have a good weekend and have fun.
Let's go ahead and talk about that weekend. When did you and Miss O'Malley arrive at the lodge?
So we got there Friday night. We showed up, everyone else had already gotten there. And we kind of came in late to the party and we're introducing ourselves and everything and mingling and getting to know people.
Can you tell us a little more about that first night? Who else did you meet?
Yeah, so when we first got there, I met the Hicks, Bill and Judy Green. And when I first met Bill Green, he was kind of standoffish. He wasn't really that nice when we came in, but then later he came up to me and started talking to me and he ended up being really funny and we had a really good conversation.
How was that conversation with him?
It was good, you know, he ended up, like I said, being really funny and we talked about politics of all things and he just had some funny statements.
Let's talk about Saturday now. What did you do that morning?
Well, that morning I slept in because I might have had a little too much wine the night before. But once I woke up, I kind of went around to find everyone and see what they were doing.
What about later on in the morning? What did you do next?
Well, Jan Alexander came back with the alcohol, and at that point is when Bill Green and I grabbed a bottle of whiskey and went on a hike.
What did you do on the hike?
Well, you know, we were walking, hiking, and we were drinking. We were drinking from the whiskey bottle.
How did you feel when you got back from the hike?
We were definitely tipsy. We drank
some of that whiskey, so we were tipsy.
And when you got back, what did you do?
When we got back, we were walking up to the picnic table, and that's where Chris O'Malley and Mr. Jan Alexander were sitting. They were just talking.
Was anybody else at that picnic table?
No, it was just the two of them.
Was there guns and ammunition around?
Yeah, so there was guns and ammunition on the table, and Chris was actually playing with a gun.
How did Mr. Alexander respond to that?
Mr. Alexander actually said for him to stop and that he didn't seem like he was in the type of shape to be handling a gun.
Were the guns moved at that point?
No, they weren't moved.
What about the ammunition? Was any of the ammunition moved away?
No, it wasn't.
How about the alcohol? Was the alcohol moved away?
No, all the alcohol was left there.
Who was drinking at this time?
Well, at that time, when I walked up, Mr. Jan Alexander just finished a big glass of whiskey and was pouring himself another. And he was also Chris was also drinking something.
Other than drinking as you've described, what was Jan Alexander doing?
He was just kind of talking to Chris, and he said something about Bill Green being a bad one.
What happened next?
Well, at that point, Bill and I went inside to help make a salad for dinner. And we went in and started to prepare that.
Were you inside for the rest of the night?
No, I think we were inside for maybe an hour, and then we came back out to the picnic table.
How did Jan react to you coming back out to the picnic table?
Jan wasn't happy.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
It's sustained in my foundation.
Yes, Your Honor. When you went back out to the picnic table, what happened?
When I went back out, Jan Alexander was sitting there, and I heard her say some things about Bill Green that weren't very nice.
What happened next?
Well, what happened? Well, so this is about when Bill Green started to kind of egg on a gun contest with Chris O'Malley. He had heard that Chris had been pretty fast with the gun earlier in the day.
Your Honor, goes to speculation as well, or hearsay, sorry.
Your response?
Yes, I believe that the witness is testifying to, she's personnel knowledge about the conversation that happened, and I can move on. I can rephrase the question.
Okay, it's sustained.
Yes, Your Honor. When you went back outside, what happened?
This is about the time that the quick draw contest happened between Bill Green and Chris O'Malley.
Were there guns around at this time?
Yes, there were.
Did anyone unload the guns?
Not that I'm aware of.
How did Jan Alexander react to the conversation about the gun draw competition?
He just got up and said, "This is stupid. You shouldn't do this." And then he walked away.
Did you see the gun draw competition between Mr. Green and Ms. O'Malley?
Yes, I did.
Were you there when the gun went off?
Yes, I was.
What happened right after the gun went off?
Well, the gun goes off and Chris is just so confused. She's just really upset. She's freaking out, and she's just distraught, and she's muttering like, "Oh, how did that happen? What happened?" She didn't understand, and it was horrible.
What happened next?
Police and the ambulance came, and Bill Green was dead, and we just kind of we were just really upset.
I pass this witness.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Collins, you're best friends with Ms. O'Malley, right?
Yes, I am.
Been best friends for about 30 years?
Yes.
Went to grade school together,
Yeah.
and then went to high school together,
Yeah, we did.
and in college.
Yeah.
And in college, the two of you would go out to bars sometimes.
Yeah, we were in college.
And at these bars, guys would occasionally come up to you, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance?
So Your Honor, we're going into the possible state of mind of Ms. O'Malley and how Ms. Collins was on notice of that state of mind. As we are bringing a kind of negligence of fault of another, Ms. O'Malley, this goes to the state of mind that Ms. O'Malley was in.
When she was in college?
Your Honor, if it goes to the notice that Ms. Collins was in as to that possible state of mind, as she was the witness of, the only witness of the trial.
What's the period of time between college and the incident that's made the basis of this lawsuit?
It has been about 15 years, Your Honor, but as it permitted, Ms. Collins can testify that this has continued even up to the car drive on the way to the weekend.
What is stated as to the incidences in college? You can see what you can find sooner to know that.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Collins, you drove up to the lodge with Ms. O'Malley, right?
Yes.
And you'd say that Ms. O'Malley was being possessive on this drive up.
I might have said possessive, but yeah, she was just being a friend. I mean, she's being Chris.
But you'd say she was being possessive as well.
I would say, yeah, I mean, as possessive as a friend can be.
Is that a yes, Ms. Collins?
Yeah.
And you'd say that this made you upset.
Yeah, I mean, she's my friend. I don't like when she did that.
You decided to make a point to Ms. O'Malley that weekend that the two of you would never be romantic, right?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Your Honor, again, this goes to the state of mind that both Ms. Collins and Ms. O'Malley were in that weekend, driving up to the lodge when they got there, and the state of mind that could have been present during the negligent episode, the alleged negligent episode, Your Honor.
Allow it, but you're on thin ice.
Yes,
So
Your Honor.
make it relevant somewhere.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Collins, let me ask my question again. You decided to make a point that weekend to Ms. O'Malley that the two of you would never be romantic, correct?
Yeah.
You invited Mr. Green on a hike alone together.
Yeah.
In front of Ms. O'Malley.
Yes.
Oh, Ms. Collins, you went on this hike with Mr. Green, right?
Yeah, I did.
Before you went on that hike, you saw Ms. O'Malley drinking.
Yeah, I think she might have been drinking.
Now, you know that Miss O'Malley's drink of choice is Death's Door gin.
Yeah, that used to be her drink of choice.
In fact, she would only drink gin whenever she would go out prior to going to this recovery center, correct?
I don't know if it's the only thing that she would drink, but she did like drinking it.
Have you ever testified differently?
Oh, I'm just not sure if that's the only thing that she would drink. I could have said that, but we went out a lot.
Miss Collins, you remember giving a deposition for this trial, correct?
Yes.
I was there,
Yes.
your attorney was there,
Yes.
and you swore to tell the truth, correct?
Yes.
The whole truth,
Yes.
just like you did today.
Yes.
Your Honor, and opposing counsel, I would like to reference you to page 3 of Ms. Collins' deposition, lines 21 through 22. Your permission to approach?
Yes.
Ms. Collins, this is your deposition, correct?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Collins, Your Honor, sorry, Ms. Collins, I'm going to read your deposition out loud to you. Please correct me if I'm wrong. What did Chris like to drink before recovery? Gin. Always gin. Death's Door gin, to be exact. Chris really likes the bottle. I read that correctly.
Yeah, that's what he likes to drink. That's not what he always drinks.
Gin, always gin.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Collins, despite your 30 years of friendship with Ms. O'Malley, you had no idea whether or not Ms. O'Malley was drunk that Saturday, September 26th, correct?
Yeah. Correct. I think.
Let me ask my question again.
Yeah, I think I was confused by your question.
Despite your 30 years of friendship with Ms. O'Malley, you didn't know whether or not Ms. O'Malley was drunk that Saturday, correct?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Green was also drinking on that hike with you Saturday.
Yes, he was.
He drank about half the bottle of Jack Daniels.
I think that's about right, yeah.
The same Jack Daniels that you snatched off the picnic table, correct?
Yeah, I took it on the hike.
Mr. Alexander never offered that bottle to you, did he?
Well, he offered it when he put it on the table and offered it to all of us for like a self-serving.
Ms. Collins, have you ever testified differently?
I mean, he didn't hand the bottle to me, if that's what you're asking, no.
He never offered the bottle to you.
No, he never said the words, here, you can take this bottle.
You never heard him say those words to Mr. Green either, did you?
No,
Now, in fact, Mr. Alexander did the opposite. You saw him try to stop Mr. Green from drinking after you got back from the hike, right?
yes,
You tried to cut Mr. Green off.
I think he tried, yeah.
Ms. Collins, I want to move on now to the gun draw competition that you witnessed between Ms. O'Malley and Mr. Green, okay? Now, you are the only witness to that, correct?
Yes,
And you saw Mr. Green pour himself and Ms. O'Malley a glass of liquor before the competition.
yes,
This was minutes before Mr. Green's death.
yes, it was.
And Ms. Collins, you don't actually remember what type of alcohol Mr. Green poured,
No, I don't,
just that Mr. Green poured it.
yes.
Then for the gun draw competition, Mr. Alexander went inside.
Yes, yes.
He didn't see it happen.
Well, he saw them with the gun.
He didn't see the gun draw competition happen.
No,
And Ms. Collins, you know that he tried to get Mr. Green to stop bullying Ms. O'Malley.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation. Sorry, repeat your question.
You know that he tried to get Mr. Green to stop bullying Ms. O'Malley.
Do you know?
I do know.
You know that Mr. Alexander tried to get Mr. Green to stop bullying Ms. O'Malley.
Yeah, he just said to stop.
You know that Mr. Alexander tried to get Mr. Green to go back inside.
I don't remember if he did that right before the gun went off.
Your memory is a little hazy about the entire situation.
Not the entire situation, but a little. Yeah.
And Ms. Collins, you know that Mr. Alexander tried to warn both Mr. Green and Ms. O'Malley not to partake in this gun draw competition.
Yeah, he just said something and then walked away.
But they ignored Mr. Alexander's warning.
Yeah,
They got up to play quick draw.
Yeah.
They both drew their guns,
yes.
but Mr. O'Malley stopped for a minute.
Yeah, he did.
And Mr. Green said, "Really, you're not gonna do anything?"
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Your Honor, it goes to cited utterance.
Yeah, do you have an exception?
Excited utterance, Your Honor. At this point, the guns were drawn and Mr. Green was the one who had drawn his gun first.
It's sustained.
Ms. Collins, you know that Mr. Green taunted Miss O'Malley.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Your Honor, I'm not going to the statement asserted.
Exception.
Yes, Your Honor, present sense impression.
Okay, so it's sustained.
Ms. Collins. Back to the gun being drawn and Miss O'Malley having stopped for a minute. After a minute, she pointed her gun at Mr. Green.
Yes,
You heard the gun go off.
I did.
You saw Mr. Green fall to the floor.
Yes, I did.
He's dead.
Yes,
You heard Miss Collins say, "I shot him."
I'm Miss Collins.
I'm sorry, you heard Miss O'Malley say, "I shot him."
Yeah, yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Ms. Collins, was Jan Alexander there when Mr. Green handed Miss O'Malley a drink?
Yes,
Was Jan Alexander there when Mr. Green gave Miss O'Malley a gun?
yes.
I have no further questions. Yes, that's fine.
At this time, the plaintiff rests, Your Honor.
I'm sorry, you said what, Mr. Hargis?
At this time, the plaintiff rests.
Thank you. on the break, or would you prefer to proceed?
Your Honor, at this time, defendants would like to move for a judgment as a matter of law.
Did you hear my question?
Yes,
Your Honor, a quick break would be appreciated.
Right, let's take 10 minutes and we'll be back.
Oh, that's back to.
Okay, we're back on the record. Mr. Wilson, now wish to make.
yes, Your Honor.
Okay, you may proceed.
At this time, I'd like to move for a judgment as a matter of law. Based on the evidence we've just seen and the testimony we just heard, no reasonable juror could find by a preponderance of the evidence that Jan Alexander caused the death of Bill Green. Additionally, I'd like to point out, under the Dram Shop Act, the law the plaintiff is using here, plaintiff has not proven that Jan Alexander served a visibly intoxicated Chris O'Malley.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor, as to the causation, there's been plenty of evidence and testimony today that Jan Alexander failed to make her premises safe for guests, which approximately caused the death of Bill Green. And as for the Dram Shop Act, we are not able to call witnesses adversely, and therefore Jan Alexander has not been called to the stand to testify as to this yet.
Okay, reply.
Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to point out that subsection 1 of the Dram Shop Act, if my co-counsel may open it, it prevents the plaintiff from bringing other causes of action, such as premises liability and negligence.
Motion will be denied. You may call your first witness.
Your Honor, defense calls Officer Valdez.
Balance, if you'll approach, please. Watch your step coming up. It's my understanding you've been released, is that correct?
Yes.
You may proceed, pull the microphone up to you.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Officer Valdez, could you introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, my name's Mo Valdez. I'm an officer here.
Officer Valdez, how long have you been a police officer?
Well, 13 years now. I've worked at the Masonville Police Department, so pretty long time.
And before beginning as a police officer, what kind of education training did you have to do?
Well, I started out by getting my degree in criminal justice. I then went on to Lone Star Ranger School and got a certificate. I learned a lot more about criminal law. I also learned forensics, accident investigation techniques, and interrogation techniques. And additionally, I worked under John Doolittle for 2 years. He was a legend at our police department. After that, I got my own patrol.
And have you applied those techniques you learned in Ranger School throughout your career?
Every day, in one way or another.
Did you apply those techniques to the case why we're here today?
Yes, I did. All of them.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to tender Officer Mo Valdez as an expert in crime scene investigation.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
So tender.
Officer Valdez, I want to shift gears and focus on this case and why we're here. Do you know Jan Alexander?
I do, yes.
How do you know Mr. Alexander?
He's the chief of police in Masonville.
Could you describe your relationship with Jan Alexander?
Well, Jan's a fine man. He's an even better police officer. It's a privilege and an honor to work under his command.
Officer Valdez, do you recall what you did on September 26, 2020?
Yes, I do. I was driving around in my patrol car, doing my typical patrol around the area.
And did you respond to any crimes that day?
I did, yes. I received a call about an incident happening at Mr. Alexander's lodge.
Were you made aware of the extent of that incident?
I was informed that someone had been shot, so I immediately, responded, rushed over there.
At what time did you arrive to Mr. Jan Alexander's lodge?
Well, I got the call about, I want to say 5:30 p.m. Ended up getting there around 6 o'clock.
Were you alone?
No, I was not. I was accompanied by my partner, Officer Jimmy Chu.
Once you and Officer Chu arrived to the scene, describe to us what you see.
Well, there was a man laying on the ground. 2 ambulance technicians appeared to be working on him. I immediately secured the scene, moved everyone back, and began interviewing everyone that was there. And I instructed Officer Jimmy Chu to secure all physical evidence.
Were you able to identify that individual you said you saw on the ground?
I was. That was Mr. Bill Green.
Was?
And he was pale as a ghost. I mean, no pulse. Paramedics were trying, but it's too late.
And you mentioned you instructed Officer Chu to collect evidence. What evidence was collected?
Well, Officer Chu, he went and collected multiple liquor bottles, shell casings from appeared to be multiple guns. Mr. Bill Green's clothing was taken, and a few blood samples taken as well.
Whose blood was taken?
Chris O'Malley's blood was taken.
Why was Chris O'Malley's blood taken?
Well, when I first began my interview with Miss O'Malley, she was exhibiting multiple signs of intoxication. Her eyes were red, watery. She seemed very distraught. She smelled strongly of alcohol and was somewhat slurring her words.
How else did she appear to you?
She was acting very distraught, you know, excited. She seemed, you know, intoxicated.
You mentioned she was distraught. Did you figure out why?
Yes, it's because she was the one that had shot Mr. Bill Green.
Once you discovered this, once you learned this, what did you do?
Well, I immediately put Miss O'Malley under arrest for suspicion of homicide.
Objection, Your Honor. Unfairly prejudicial.
It's overruled. It's already before the jury anyway.
Now I want to shift our focus back to Bill Green. Was an autopsy performed?
Yes, an autopsy was done on Mr. Green.
Your Honor, at this time, may I approach this witness? What has been pre-marked as Exhibit 2? Officer Valdez, I'm showing you what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 2. Do you recognize this?
It's the autopsy report of Mr. Bill Green.
Is this a true and correct copy of Mr. Bill Green's autopsy report?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this time, defense would like to offer Exhibit 2 into evidence.
Objections?
Yes, Your Honor, I'd like to object on grounds of relevance. It's already been established through testimony that Mr. Green was shot and died as a result of the shot, and the autopsy report and information contained in it are not relevant to proving.
Do you have another objection?
Improper foundation has not been laid.
You're close. You want to try one more time?
Yes, Your Honor, improper expert opinion. This officer is not an expert in medical.
Okay, it's overruled.
Your Honor, may Exhibit 2 be published to the jury?
Did you? Yes.
Now, Officer Valdez, I'm showing you the last page, Exhibit 2. Can you tell us what these findings are?
Yes, they are they're samples and toxicology report of Mr. Green's blood.
And what do these results reveal?
They reveal that Mr. Green had ethanol in his blood at 0.23 grams per deciliter, which is almost 3 times the legal limit. And he also had THC present in his blood as well.
I want to shift to Miss O'Malley. Did you receive results on those blood tests?
Yes, we did. We conducted forensics on that as well.
Your Honor, may I once again approach this witness?
Yes.
Officer Valdez, I'm showing you what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 3. Do you recognize this?
I do, yes.
And what do you recognize this as?
It's the forensics that were run on Miss O'Malley.
And is this a true and correct copy of Miss O'Malley's forensic blood reports?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to offer Exhibit 3 into evidence.
No objection.
Your Honor, may Exhibit 3 be published to the jury?
Yes.
Once again, Officer Valdez, can you tell the members of the jury what these findings tell?
Yes, so similar forensics were run on Miss O'Malley's blood. Came back at 0.222% by alcohol, BAC, blood alcohol content again. It's almost 3 times the legal limit, signifying that this woman was extremely intoxicated under the influence.
What is the legal limit, Officer Valdez?
It's 0.08.
Now, you mentioned 3 pistols were recovered from the crime scene. Did you identify which pistol fired the shot that killed Mr. Green?
Yes, I did.
And which gun was that?
That was the Ruger Mark IV 22 caliber.
Were you able to determine who that pistol belonged to?
Belonged to Miss Chris O'Malley.
Officer Valdez, did you conduct a thorough investigation?
You know, I believe that I did. I analyzed and utilized all the techniques that I learned in Ranger School, and applied them to the situation at hand.
Has your investigation reached a conclusion?
It has.
And what is that conclusion?
Well, I concluded that both Miss O'Malley and Mr. Green were heavily under the influence of alcohol. Both were extremely intoxicated. This caused them to have lower inhibitions. And for some reason, they decided to participate in a gun duel. And unfortunately, Miss O'Malley shot Mr. Green in the chest, resulting in his death.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Bauer.
May I proceed?
Yes, of course.
Officer Valdez, you've been a police officer for 13 years, right?
Yes, that's right.
And you have a degree in criminal justice,
That's correct. Yes.
and you have professional training from the Lone Star Ranger School.
Yes.
Officer Valdez, you were the investigating officer at the events at Jan Alexander's cabin on the day of September 26th, right?
Yes.
And you had another officer with you that night, Officer Chu.
Yes, he's my partner.
You and Officer Chu both produced reports based on your investigation that day, right?
We did both produce reports. Yes.
And you'd agree that you record what's considered important to you in those reports.
Oh, yes.
And you've read yours and Officer Chu's report from that day.
I have. Yes.
Let's talk about September 26th. You were on patrol when you got a call that there was a shooting at your boss's hunting lodge, right?
Yes. I received a call and I immediately responded.
And you were familiar with the location of the shooting before you got there, right?
What do you mean by that exactly?
When you got the call, you were already familiar with the location of Jan Alexander's lodge.
Yes, I drove straight there.
And you're familiar with it because you know the cabin belongs to Ms. Alexander, right?
Yes,
So you and Officer Chu head out to the lodge in response to the call.
that's exactly what we did.
And when you got there, you marked the area as a crime scene.
Yes, we secured the scene, moved everyone back.
And you assigned Officer Chu to go get physical evidence while you interviewed suspects, right?
Yes.
And you had known before arriving that someone had been shot.
Yes.
And you saw in front of you the person who had been shot.
Yep.
But you didn't see any guns on the scene, did you, Officer Valdez?
Not by the body, if that's what you're asking. Yes, there were no guns there.
Right, and in fact, during your investigation, you heard Ms. Alexander say that she moved the guns from the scene of the shooting to a gun safe, right?
She did mention that.
But you didn't write this down anywhere.
I was only able to write down, I can't unfortunately write as fast as the court reporter can type. In conducting my criminal investigation of Miss O'Malley, I didn't find it relevant to include where the guns were found.
You didn't find it relevant to include where the guns, while investigating a shooting, were found.
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
Overruled.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
You didn't find it relevant in your investigation of the scene of a shooting where the guns were.
Well, in some scenarios, it could be relevant. In this scenario, we already knew who.
Officer, please answer the question.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You didn't find it relevant to record in your police report where the guns were found at the scene of the shooting.
No, we already knew the shooter.
And you know now, though, that instead of in a gun safe, the guns were found in Chief Alexander's bed, right?
Yes, they were found in the bed, all unloaded.
So you would agree that Chief Alexander lied about where they had moved the guns to, right?
I don't know if he lied, but that's minor inconsistency.
But you heard him say that he put them in a gun safe, right?
I did. This was just after the shooting had
And you
occurred.
know that they were found under the sheets in his bed, right?
They were found there.
All right, let's focus again on the timeline of that night. After arriving at the lodge, securing the scene, and separating out the witnesses, you learned that Bill's wife, Judy, was on the scene, right?
Judy was there, yes.
And that the shooter, Chris O'Malley, was also on the scene.
Yes.
So with a man on the ground, the man's wife on the scene, and the shooter close by, the first person you chose to interview was your boss, Jan Alexander, right?
I'm sorry, that was, could you re-ask that?
Sure. So there was a man who had been shot on the ground. His wife was there, the shooter was there, and your boss, Chief Jan Alexander, was there. And the first person you interviewed was Chief Alexander, right?
That's correct, it was his lodge.
So in your investigation, you heard Mr. Alexander say that he was afraid for the safety of people with alcohol and loaded guns lying around, right?
Yes, he didn't want anyone else to get shot.
Right. And in fact, you heard him say that alcohol and loaded guns were not a good mixture, didn't you?
I mean, he was just spouting off at this point. He was clearly upset.
And you testified that you have extensive training in accident investigations. Would you consider spouting off to be relevant to your investigation?
No.
So the host of the event where a man had just been shot said that they knew that guns and alcohol were a bad combination, and you didn't find this important to write down either.
Again, not only can I not write down everything, but the chief was just spouting off at this time. I was only taking down information that I thought relevant to help me and to help the DA prosecute and win this criminal investigation.
And you testified that Miss O'Malley consented to a blood draw test that evening, right?
She did, yes.
And you testified just moments ago that the results of that test were 0.22, is that correct?
I believe it was 0.222, yes.
0.222.
Yes.
And so you'd agree that 0.222 is higher than the minimum amount to create the assumption of visible intoxication, which is 0.08, right?
Almost 3 times as high as 0.08.
Yes. And in your interview with Ms. Alexander, she told you that she knew Ms. O'Malley had a lot to drink, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you also know that before Ms. Alexander walked away from the gunfight that ensued, she had seen Ms. O'Malley with a gun.
Who had seen Miss O'Malley with a gun?
Mr. Alexander had seen Ms. O'Malley with a gun before walking away.
I don't recall.
Have you been in this courtroom this entire time with Steve's testimony?
Yes.
And so you've heard testimony that Ms. Alexander saw Ms. O'Malley, Mr. Alexander saw Ms. O'Malley with a gun before walking away, right?
Well, there's been a lot of testimony. I don't recall that specifically.
Understandable. Officer Valdez, would you agree that you and the chief are friends outside of work?
He's my boss. I don't know how close of friends I'd say we are.
Have you spent time outside of work socializing?
Yeah, I mean, every work environment likes to spend time with their boss outside.
Absolutely. You would even say that Ms. Alexander is someone you know to hold their liquor well, right?
Mr. Alexander does hold his liquor pretty well.
And isn't it true that Chief Alexander is currently your supervisor on the case investigating the events at their lodge, right?
I believe so.
And you didn't transfer this case over to the sheriff's office because the chief said it was okay, right?
He mentioned that, but it's not the only reason. It's because I'm also competent in handling and managing investigations.
And you did discuss transferring to the sheriff's office though, right?
It was discussed, and the discussion led to me handling it again because I have experience in this area.
Right, because he said that was fine. He wanted you to handle it, right?
Yes, sure.
And his signature is at the bottom of your police report, right?
I believe so.
Officer Valdez, you've been working for Mr. Alexander for 10 of your 13 years as a cop, right?
That's correct, yes.
And you'd agree that he's a cop's chief.
He is he's a great chief, yes.
And you'd say he has your back, right?
Yes.
And you have his back too?
I'm sorry?
And you have his back too?
He's my boss, yes.
No further questions?
Yes, Your Honor. Officer Valdez, why didn't you arrest Jane Alexander?
Because Miss O'Malley was the one that shot Bill Green. There was no reason to arrest Mr. Alexander.
No further questions, Your Honor. May this witness step down?
Yes, you are excused, officer. Sanchez, you may call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor, this time defense was Mr. Jan Alexander.
Mr. Alexander, you may approach. Johnson is participating in the police corner, is that correct? Yes. And then pull the microphone close to you so you can hear.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Hi, Mr. Alexander. Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, my name is Jan Alexander, and I am the chief of the Masonville Police Department.
Now, Mr. Alexander, we've heard the term the lodge used quite a lot today. What is the lodge?
So the lodge, it's really a cabin. We just call it a hunting lodge, but it's about 30 minutes outside of town up in the East Hills.
When did you arrive at the lodge for the weekend in question?
I got there a little early sometime on Friday.
Were you on duty when you arrived there?
No, I wasn't on duty.
When did the other people arrive there?
The first guest started arriving sometime at 5 o'clock on Friday. The last guest came in around 6:30.
Was that the same day that Mr. Green was shot by Miss O'Malley?
No, Mr. Green was shot on Saturday.
Around what time would you say that happened?
I want to say sometime around 7 o'clock.
Now, we've also heard a lot of references to quick draw. What is quick draw?
You know, if you ever grew up watching Old West movies, it's kind of like a standoff. You have two people facing in front of each other. What they want to do is they put their hand on their hip and the opponents try to pull their gun out as fast as they can. So whoever pulls and aims first is the winner. Sometimes it can be stupid game.
Around how many rounds of quick draw were played on Saturday?
So there were 2 rounds of quick draw. The first took place early, sometime around the afternoon, and the second was later that evening.
Did you participate in either of these 2 rounds?
No, I did not.
Did you witness either of these 2 rounds?
I was present for the first round of quick draw. I was going for the second.
Where were you gone?
Can you repeat the question? I couldn't hear.
Where, when you say you were gone, what do you mean?
I wasn't present for the second round of quick draw. I didn't witness it.
Where were you?
I was inside of the lodge.
During which of these 2 rounds was Mr. Green shot?
Mr. Green was shot during the second round.
Now, Mr. Alexander, I want to kind of back up to the start of the weekend, Friday, September 25th. You mentioned that guests arrived that day. Have you ever had guests arrive at the lodge?
All the time. Yeah, we host people up at the lodge all the time.
What do you and these guests typically do?
You know, it's a hunting lodge. Well, it's a hunting lodge in Lone Star. So, you know, we cook, we grill, we shoot, we hunt, we drink, we have fun.
Did you provide any of your guests that weekend a gun?
No, I did not. I did have weapons at the lodge for them to use.
Okay. Now, has anybody ever been shot at your lodge before?
Never.
You mentioned that you're the owner of this hunting lodge cabin. Are there any precautions that you take with your guests?
Oh, absolutely. Obviously, if we're drinking, I have to watch my guests to make sure that they're not, becoming intoxicated or acting out. And of course, we have weapons there, so I'm pretty strict when it comes to gun safety.
Okay, I want to take those piece by piece. First, I actually want to talk about the gun safety portion. Was anybody being unsafe with their guns that weekend?
Yes. So during the first game of quick draw, they were actually shooting at targets first, and then the guests started pointing guns at each other. Chris O'Malley was one of the individuals who was part of the group. And later on that afternoon, I had an issue with Chris where, he was playing with his Ruger. He was just ejecting the magazine and sliding it back in. So I was having the most issues with him.
Okay, now you mentioned the first issue was with the quick draw round. Did you do anything?
Absolutely. When I saw that the guests were, trying to play quick draw with loaded weapons, I told everyone to stop, and I made sure that we were practicing proper gun safety. And that means, you eject the magazine, you make sure that all the bullets are out, especially in the chamber, and you check your safety.
Where did you put the magazines and the bullets?
Everything was on the picnic table.
Okay, well, the second round you mentioned was in between the first and the second, the second incident you mentioned was in between the first and the second round of quick draw with the magazine being pulled in and out. Did you do anything then?
Yes, I saw Mrs. O'Malley, pulling the magazine out and sliding it in, and I asked her to stop.
Now, to the next piece of the puzzle, the parts about guests drinking. Can you tell me if anybody seems like they were acting like they were getting drunk?
Only person.
Objection. Calls for speculation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Your Honor.
Yeah, I apologize. I was looking for you in the corner.
I think it takes a minute for my volume to pick up too.
Okay, so will you repeat your question, Ms. Sanchez? I'm sorry.
Yes, Your Honor. I asked if during that weekend, if anybody seemed like they were acting like they were getting drunk.
Okay, and your objection is speculation?
Yes, Your Honor.
They acted like they seemed like they were getting drunk. Plaintiff Foundation?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Alexander, now you mentioned that the second thing you look out for is whether guests are drinking too much. Was there anybody that you noticed was drinking more than everybody else?
Yes, Bill Green. While I was sitting outside, he and Pat were coming back from a hike. They had left the property with a bottle of whiskey and it was full. They came back and Bill was holding it. It was about half a bottle left and, you know, he was cursing, yelling. He just seemed really upset.
Why was he cursing and yelling at you?
Well, when I saw him and Pat coming back, you know, I could tell that he was drunk, you know, and at that point I was telling him, you're done, you know, you're cut off.
Did you offer Mr. Green any of that bottle that he was holding in his hand?
No, I never offered it to Mr. Green. Pat came over to the picnic table when I just purchased alcohol. She took the bottle and then she and Mr. Green went out on a hike.
After you tried to cut off Mr. Green, did he listen to you?
I think he just ignored me.
Did you try to physically restrain him from being able to drink anymore that night?
Unless I'm on duty, I'm not gonna physically restrain a grown man. You know, Bill can make his own choices and, you know, he was at the lodge. I didn't invite him, but he was there.
Mr. Alexander, I want to talk about alcohol being at the lodge. Obviously, you just mentioned drinking. Was there alcohol at the lodge on Friday?
Yes, I provided a case of wine for the guests.
Did you end up purchasing any more alcohol?
Yes, I did. On Friday, Bill complained about the lack of proper alcohol. And so I said that I was going to go into town the next morning on Saturday and purchase some more.
Did you end up going into town on Saturday?
Yes, I left the lodge around 9:45 and I went to go buy some bottles of alcohol.
Now, as you heard today, Miss O'Malley came up here and testified that she never asked you to buy any death's door for her, never gave you money to buy death's door for her. Is that true?
No.
Hey, Mr. Alexander, you also heard today that Mr. Green had alcohol and THC in his system. Did you provide him any marijuana?
Absolutely not. That would be illegal.
I want to talk about Mr. O'Malley. When did he come up to you about the death's door?
You know, I was right in the morning, you know, sometime around 9:45, right before I was about to leave.
Can you tell us about that situation?
I ended up getting $35 from him and a request to buy some death's door gin.
Was it specific?
Objection. Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Yes, Your Honor, it goes to present sense impression as well as then existing mental state of Mr. Alexander. That's why he had the plan to go purchase the liquor.
So it's sustained.
Mr. Alexander, did you use your own money to purchase the liquor, the death's door gin at the liquor store?
No, I didn't.
Whose money did you use?
Chris O'Malley's.
Mr. Alexander, when you got back, you mentioned that you unloaded the glasses or the bottles on the picnic table. Did you pour anybody a drink?
No, I did not.
Did you happen to pour anybody a drink of gin?
Well, when I put the when I put the bottles of alcohol on the table, I didn't pour at that point, but I did pour one glass that entire day.
What glass was that?
I poured a glass of gin for Chris O'Malley, and it wasn't even my idea.
Whose idea was it?
Chris O'Malley's.
Mr. Alexander, did you pour any other drinks for Mr. O'Malley that day?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, I didn't pour drinks for anyone else for the rest of the day.
Okay, Mr. Alexander, now I want to talk to the point where we get to the second round of quick draw. You mentioned that you were inside the cabin, but before you went inside, what was going on?
Well, I was sitting outside. Chris O'Malley was outside as well. Pat Collins and Bill Green had come out, and at that point, I looked over at Bill and I told him he was drunk, and I told him he needed to go inside.
Objection, hearsay.
I'm sorry?
Objection, hearsay, Your Honor,
To what?
to what Mr. Alexander said.
Yeah, overruled.
Mr. Alexander, again, did you do anything?
Yes, as soon as Bill had come out, I told him he was drunk and he needed to go inside, and Bill just ignored me. And he just proceeded to walk over to Chris, and he just started basically bullying Chris at that point.
Now, you also were here when Ms. Collins was testifying on the stand, and you heard her say that you went inside after Ms. O'Malley was holding a gun in her hand. Is that true?
No, I went inside during the bullying. As I said earlier, I asked him to go back inside once. Once I saw that that Bill Green was bullying Chris, I told Bill, this is stupid, this is done. Bill wanted to play a game of quick draw with Chris, and I got up at that point and I told him this is dumb, and I told him not to play the game.
Did you see Mr. Green pour Ms. O'Malley a glass of liquor before you went inside?
I can't say that I saw him pour a glass for Mrs. O'Malley or Miss O'Malley, but I did see Bill Green, I think, pour 2 glasses of alcohol.
And when you went inside, were Mr. Green and Miss O'Malley positioned to play quick draw?
No, they were just sitting at the picnic table.
Did you ever happen to go back outside that evening?
I did.
Why?
When I was inside the lodge, I heard a gunshot and I ran outside.
What was the first thing that you did when you got outside?
I looked over and I saw that Bill Green was on the ground. While I was standing there, Jerry Wicks, one of the guests, he ran outside and went back in to call 911. And while he was running in, I ran over and I grabbed all the weapons that were there and brought them back inside.
Why did you grab the weapons?
I was in a state of shock. I knew that I had guests who had probably had alcohol, some more than others. Emotions were high, and I just wanted to make sure that everyone's safety was a priority at that point.
Mr. Alexander, when you first got outside, you mentioned before you grabbed the guns, what did you see?
I saw Bill Green, and he was laying on the ground. He wasn't moving. And I saw Pat Collins, and she was just yelling hysterically at Chris O'Malley. And Chris was just standing there with a Ruger in her hand, and she was just muttering over and over again, I shot him. I shot him.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. No further questions at this time.
Mr. Hargis, cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor, may I proceed?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Alexander.
Good afternoon.
Now, on that weekend, you brought all the alcohol to the hunting cabin, correct?
Yes.
On Friday night, you brought all the wine.
Yes, I provided the wine on Friday.
And then on Saturday, you went and got the 3 bottles of whiskey and a bottle of gin from the liquor store, right?
No, I actually bought whiskey, rye, and bourbon, and I purchased the bottle of gin for Chris.
I understand that, but you were the one that went and got everything.
Yes, I did.
Okay. And when you got back, you just laid it all out on the picnic table outside, true?
Yes, I brought the bottles to the backyard with some glasses. It was a sunny day. I thought we should be outside.
And this was about noon?
Yeah, sometime around noon.
And then sometime around then, you poured Miss O'Malley a glass of gin, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Alexander, you knew that Miss O'Malley had had some problems with alcohol in the past, didn't you?
I did know that she was close with Charlie, my brother. They had met in a rehab center, so I knew that there were maybe some issues between them in regards to alcohol.
But you still poured her a glass.
Yes, Chris asked me to pour her a glass, and I did so.
Okay. Now, later on that afternoon, after everyone's been drinking, that's when the guns come out, correct?
This was maybe right around the time I poured that glass for Chris. So it wasn't too much longer after I poured, maybe 30, 40 minutes.
Right, but you would agree when the guns came out, people were drinking.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Alexander, wouldn't you agree with me that alcohol can be dangerous?
Yes, it can.
You would also agree with me that guns can be dangerous.
Yes, especially if they're loaded.
And you would also agree that guns and alcohol mixed together, that can be dangerous, right?
Yes, especially if you have a loaded weapon.
And especially if the person handling the gun is intoxicated, correct?
Yes, if they have a loaded weapon, absolutely.
Okay, so when this quick draw contest happens, I guess Jerry Wicks was the one that started this, right?
Yes, Charlie set up the targets and Jerry started the quick draw.
And then some of the other guests joined in.
Yes,
And you're sitting right there while your guests are having the quick draw contest.
no. As soon as they started, I felt uncomfortable when they were pointing at each other. The quick draw contest started with the guests just pulling their gun out the fastest. But when they started pointing them at each other is when I stepped in.
Let me ask it this way, Mr. Alexander. You were right there watching it when the quick draw contest started, were you not?
Yes, I was there when it started.
Okay. And Chris O'Malley was involved in these contests too, right?
Yes, she was the fastest.
And it made you uncomfortable that they were having these contests.
No, it only made me uncomfortable when they started pointing at each other.
Right. And that's when you say you made them unload the magazines.
Yes, and the bullets.
But you never checked the barrel to make sure they were completely empty, did you?
Well, that is the entire purpose of emptying a gun. You know, it's proper gun safety. You eject a magazine, and while you're ejecting it, you check the safety and you check the slide. And that's why we had magazines and bullets on the picnic table.
So you're saying you did make sure your guests checked the slots and ejected any other bullets?
I'm saying that I watched over them and I made sure that they emptied their guns.
But you didn't check yourself though, right?
No, I watched over everyone as they did it.
Okay. Now, after the quick draw contest ended, that's about when Bill Green comes back.
Yes, sometime a little after, yes.
And you said you noticed that Mr. Green was intoxicated.
Yes,
And I think you testified on direct that you try to do everything you can to make sure your guests don't get intoxicated, right?
well, we are there to drink. The issue is when they start acting out while they're drunk. That's when we have problems.
And you want to put a stop to that, don't you?
Yes.
But you never took the alcohol inside, did you?
No, I didn't take any bottles inside.
And around this time when Bill comes back, this is when you see Chris playing with the gun.
It was sometime close to when Bill came back.
And you recognize that Chris had been drinking pretty heavily that day too, right?
Yes, I did see Chris O'Malley drinking.
But you didn't move the alcohol away from Miss O'Malley, did you?
No, I didn't move or touch any alcohol near Miss O'Malley.
You told her to stop playing with the gun,
Yes, I did.
but you didn't move the guns inside, did you?
I asked Miss O'Malley to stop playing with her gun. I didn't touch any of my weapons.
So they're still there on the picnic table, right?
Mhm.
And the ammunition's all still right there on the picnic table.
Yes,
And at this point, I think you said it's about 7 p.m., correct?
or when they're ejecting the gun.
Yes.
This was a little before that. It didn't, when you're saying before 7 p.m., that was around the second quick draw round. This was a little before that.
Okay, but it's later in the afternoon. Is that fair?
Yes, yes, it is.
So everyone's been drinking for several hours now. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes,
Okay. And the next thing that you say happens is you notice Bill and Chris are about to have a quick draw contest.
no, I noticed that Bill was bullying Chris into having a quick draw contest.
But you testified on direct that Bill wanted to play quick draw. Is that right? Did I hear that right?
Yes,
Okay. And then you decide to leave the two of them out there.
yes, I got up and walked away after warning them.
But before you get up and walk away, you tell them not to have a gunfight, don't you?
Yes, before I got up, I told them that this was stupid, and I said that they shouldn't have this gun, that they shouldn't engage in the contest, and I didn't think they were going to ignore me.
But gunfight was the word you used, wasn't it?
A quick draw, that's the term I meant to use.
That's the term you meant to use. So in your mind, there's a real possibility that they're about to get up and have a gunfight.
No, I told them not to do it, and that should have ended it then at that point.
But it didn't, did it?
No, it did not.
Because a few seconds after you walk away, you hear a gunshot, don't you?
Yes, I did.
Let's back up real quick. Before you went inside, you didn't move the guns away from them, right?
No, I didn't move any weapons.
You didn't tell them to go inside.
Yes, I told Bill as soon as he walked out, before he even started bullying Chris O'Malley to go back inside.
But right before you walk away, you didn't tell Bill and Chris to go inside, did you?
No, I just told them to stop it and to not engage in the quick draw and that it was stupid.
And you left the alcohol out there, right?
Yes, I did. I didn't bring any alcohol inside.
And at this time, the guns and ammunition are still out on that picnic table.
Your
Yes.
Honor, objection asked and answered multiple times.
Okay, get to the next point.
Yes, Your Honor. So that's when you walk away, Mr. Alexander.
Yes,
And the next thing you hear is the gunshot that killed Bill Green.
yes,
And only then do you decide to move the guns into the house.
yes, I did move the guns after Bill had been shot.
You said that you prioritize the safety of your guests on direct. But you only prioritize their safety after someone had been shot. Isn't that fair?
I don't think that's fair.
So about 30 minutes later, officers Chu and Valdez arrive, correct?
Yes,
And Mr. Alexander, you tell Officer Valdez that you were worried about your guest's safety with the guns, the loaded guns and the alcohol, correct?
yes,
In fact, you told him that guns and alcohol together is a bad mix, didn't you?
yes.
Now, Mr. Alexander, true or false, you brought all the alcohol on September 26, 2020,
Yes, I did.
and you allowed your guests to drink while the guns were outside.
Yes, I did.
And you walked away after recognizing that Chris O'Malley and Bill Green might have a quick draw contest.
I walked away after warning them. I didn't recognize anything.
And sitting here today, you take zero responsibility for Bill Green dying on your property, correct?
I wasn't the one who shot Bill Green.
Is that a yes, Mr. Alexander?
I was not responsible for Bill Green dying.
No further questions.
Anything further on direct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, you may proceed.
Now, Mr. Alexander, who gave you the money to buy the Death Store gin?
Chris O'Malley.
Mr. Alexander, what steps did you take to try to prevent the second round of quick draw?
When Bill Green came outside, I told him he was drunk and that he should go back in the lodge. When Bill was bullying Chris into the quick draw round, I told him to stop it, that it was stupid. And as I was getting up to leave, I turned around and I warned them both to not play the game.
Did Mr. Green and Miss O'Malley ignore your warning?
Yes,
Thank you. No further question at this time, Your Honor. May the witness step down?
Yes, you may step down. May I call your next witness?
Your Honor, no, defense rests.
Anything further? You just want to take a quick break? I'm going to stay here before we close.
Yes, Your Honor, please.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, we're moving to closing argument. I'm guessing Mr. Hargis, are you ready for closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor. If I could reserve a minute and a half for rebuttal too.
Okay, so I can do that, but you would first have to tell me how long your closing is going to be, so I know when it's a minute and a half.
Yes, Your Honor. I think I have about 16 minutes left. I don't plan on using all that time. So probably 10 minutes to close. And then an extra minute and a half for
You want
rebuttal.
9 in, actually 8.5. You want 8.5 in the open of your close and a minute and a half in the close of your close?
Your Honor, if I could, let's go 10 for the first part and then a minute and a half for rebuttal.
Perfect. Okay. You may proceed.
Thank you. May it please the court. It doesn't take the chief of police to know that guns aren't toys. Despite what the defense may want you to think, we're not here today just to consider the shooting itself. We're here today to consider all the things that led up to Bill Green's death on September 26, 2020, and all the decisions that were made by the defendant, Jan Alexander, in the time leading up to Mr. Green's death. Because it was Mr. Alexander that supplied all of the alcohol on September 26th. It was Mr. Alexander that sanctioned these quick draw contests that his drunk guests were engaging in. It was Mr. Alexander that sensed a dangerous situation on his property, and it was Mr. Alexander that stood by and did nothing about it. So let's go back in time to September 26, 2020. Judy Green wakes up that morning. She's at her friend's hunting lodge. It's supposed to be a weekend full of fun and shooting and socializing with her friends. Judy Green wakes up that Saturday morning and she has no idea how tragic that day will turn. She has no idea that by 7 o'clock that evening, she will be without a husband. So let's talk about the choices that Mr. Alexander made on that day. It's Mr. Alexander that chooses to drive into town and buy liquor for his guest. He buys 3 bottles of whiskey and a bottle of gin. And he gets back and he unloads all this liquor onto the picnic table right there in front of his guests. Then he says, "Have at it," and pours himself a tall glass of whiskey and encourages his guests to pour themselves drinks. It's Mr. Alexander that chooses to begin egging on Miss O'Malley, constantly trying to give her a drink. And eventually Miss O'Malley, she does take that drink. But Mr. Alexander doesn't stop there. He keeps pouring Miss O'Malley shot after shot after shot. And while all this drinking is going on, that's when the guns enter the mix. What starts out as some simple target shooting quickly turns into something much more dangerous. When his guests right there in front of him begin having quick draw contests, pointing guns at each other, seeing who can pull out their guns the fastest. And there's Mr. Alexander, just sitting right there watching it all. He told you it made him uncomfortable. And then he asked his guests to take out the magazines. But he didn't check to make sure the magazines were out. He didn't check to make sure the barrels were empty. He chose not to move the ammunition away from the guns. He chose not to move the guns inside. He chose not to move the alcohol inside away from his drunk guests. He just sat there and kept drinking whiskey while his guests continue with these quick draw contests. And all this dangerous activity is going on throughout the afternoon. And Mr. Alexander, he keeps pouring Miss O'Malley drinks. He knows that Miss O'Malley has been drinking all afternoon. He knows she's intoxicated because he's the one that's been pouring her shots all afternoon. And then Bill Green comes back. Mr. Alexander told you today, he can tell that Mr. Green had been drinking. Mr. Alexander also told you that Miss O'Malley's sitting right there playing with one of the guns. And Mr. Alexander recognizes she's drunk at this point and tells her she is in no condition to be playing with this gun. And then Mr. Alexander chooses to watch as Mr. Green and Miss O'Malley get ready to have a quick draw contest. Now, the defense wants you to believe that this is somehow an intentional killing by Miss O'Malley, that Bill Green had it coming or something. But ladies and gentlemen, that is all smoke and mirrors, because the important thing is that Mr. Alexander is sitting right there watching it all. He doesn't make them stop. He doesn't make them go inside. He doesn't take the guns away. He doesn't at least check again to make sure the guns are unloaded. But what does he say? He tells Miss O'Malley, "I wouldn't take this nonsense if I were you." What else does he say? Don't have a gunfight. Like he already knew what was coming. And then he just walks away. And only seconds later, Mr. Alexander tells you he hears a shot that comes from Miss O'Malley's gun that Mr. Alexander chose to do nothing about. And only then does Mr. Alexander decide, maybe it's a good idea for these guns to be inside, away from my drunk guests. Mr. Alexander's choices had one tragic consequence that day. And that consequence was Bill Green losing his life. The judge will instruct you after we get done with our closing arguments that your job today is to determine whose negligence approximately caused the death of Bill Green. So in the jury instructions, you'll see there are 3 different ways to find Mr. Alexander negligent. The first way is called the Dram Shop Act. Basically what that says is that it is unreasonable to serve a visibly intoxicated person, and that the person who serves the alcohol is liable for any foreseeable injuries caused by that intoxicated person. We heard today, Mr. Alexander was serving alcohol to Miss O'Malley all afternoon, and that he knew Miss O'Malley had troubles with alcohol in the past, and that Mr. Alexander recognized that Miss O'Malley and Mr. Green would engage in a quick draw contest with real guns, with ammunition lying right there next to it all, and the alcohol lying right there next to it all. It was more than foreseeable that someone was gonna get hurt. There's 2 other ways you can find Mr. Alexander liable today, and that's premises liability, which basically means Mr. Alexander was required to keep his property safe. And then ordinary negligence. Now, when you see the jury instructions in a few minutes, there's a bunch of fancy legal terms in there. Basically what it all comes down to is whether the choices Mr. Alexander made on September 26th were reasonable. So ask yourself, was it reasonable for him to bring all this alcohol for his guests that he knew would be using real guns? Was it reasonable for him to allow his guests to drink all that liquor while loaded guns are just laying out? Was it reasonable for him to not make sure the guns were completely unloaded? Was it reasonable for him to not move the guns inside once he recognized the danger alcohol and guns present, a danger he even communicated to Officer Valdez? Was it reasonable for him to leave the ammunition just laying out on the picnic table right next to the guns and alcohol? Was it reasonable for him to allow these quick draw contests in the first place? Was it reasonable for him to simply walk away when he saw Bill Green and Chris O'Malley about to have a quick draw contest after they had been drinking all afternoon? And your job is to decide whether these negligent choices by Mr. Alexander approximately caused Bill Green's death. To put it simply, without all these choices by Mr. Alexander, Chris O'Malley never becomes intoxicated, the mixture of loaded guns and alcohol never exists, and a quick draw contest between Bill Green and Chris O'Malley never occurs. And Bill Green is still alive, and we aren't even here today. Now, as the plaintiff in this case, Judy Green had the burden to prove all these things based on a preponderance of the evidence. That's just another fancy legal term. Basically what it means is something's more likely true than not true. My co-counsel, Ms. Bauer, and I, we own that burden. We have owned that burden since the day we took this case, and we have met that burden here today. I expect the defense is going to get up here before you in a minute. They're going to spend their entire closing argument making excuses, trying to place the blame on someone else. The defense is trying to distract you with a bunch of drama between the guests that weekend because they don't want you to think about all the irresponsible choices Jan Alexander made. The fact is, folks, Mr. Alexander was too caught up in all this drama that he didn't even take steps necessary to make his property safe. Him simply telling his guests to stop wasn't enough. And Bill Green is dead because of it. Despite all these irresponsible choices he made on September 26, 2020, that led to Mr. Green's death, I expect the defense will get up here and take zero responsibility, just like Mr. Alexander took zero responsibility on the witness stand today. That's why it's your job to force him to take responsibility by finding him negligent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hargis. Closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Counsel, members of the jury. Plaintiff just got on the screen and pointed the finger at my client Mr. Alexander over and over and over again. What they've been doing all trial. But what they seem to have forgotten is that Miss O'Malley pointed the gun at Mr. Green on September 26th, 2020. That's an undisputed fact. A fact that plaintiff didn't dwell on very long, did they? In fact, they made excuses. They put out distractions to try to detract from this undisputed fact. Now, throughout today's trial, evidence has been brought before all of you by both sides. What I said, what my co-counsel said, what plaintiff said, that's not evidence. The statements of the witnesses, the exhibits brought before you, that's evidence. And out of all of that, you take what's credible, and that's what you use to make your final decision. I want to talk about the evidence. I'm not going to talk about everything. I'm going to talk about the things that plaintiffs seem to have forgotten to mention to you guys. On Friday, September 25th, Mr. Alexander arrived at the lodge, and so did his guest. But one person showed up uninvited, Mr. Green. Shortly after, Mr. Green decides to start complaining about the wine that's there, how it's not enough, how he needs liquor. Then my client, Mr. Alexander, Saturday morning, goes to the liquor store. But before my client can go to the liquor store, Miss O'Malley comes up to my client's truck, gives my client $35 to buy Death's Door gin. Now, a plaintiff would have you believe that none of this ever happened. That's just not true. But Ms. Collins got up on this stand and she told you that Death's Door gin is not only Miss O'Malley's drink of choice, that she would only drink gin prior to going to recovery. Now, once my client, Mr. Alexander, gets back from the liquor store, he unloads 4 bottles of alcohol on that picnic table. 3 brown liquors and 1 gin, Death's Door gin. Miss O'Malley, Mr. Green and Miss Collins proceed to go on their hike. But Miss Collins, before going on that hike, snatches a Jack Daniels off the liquor table. She told you herself that that liquor was never offered to her, that Mr. Alexander never told her that she could have that liquor, but she snatched it and her and Mr. Green go on a hike together. On that hike, Mr. Green chose to drink half of the bottle of Jack Daniels. And on top of that, we know that Mr. Green had THC in his system. So maybe he smoked a joint too. All off the property of the lodge. Now again, after this happens, Mr. Green and Miss Collins come back from that hike. And once they get back from that hike, my client, Mr. Alexander, tries to cut Mr. Green off for the first time that day. That's the first time that my client saw Mr. Green acting drunk. Mr. Green had been gone the entire day. What does Mr. Green do? Ignores Mr. Alexander. We're back up just a little bit. While Mr. Green and Miss Collins are gone on this hike, Mr. Alexander pours 1 glass of gin for Miss O'Malley that day. Her very first glass at noon. I told you that Miss O'Malley never asked for this glass of liquor to be poured for her. And instead, Mr. Alexander was harassing her to drink this. That Miss O'Malley caved because of Mr. Alexander. But again, this is the Death's Door gin that she specifically requested. Now, there were 2 rounds of quick draw on Saturday. One earlier in the afternoon and the second in the evening. During the first round, Mr. Alexander makes sure that everybody takes the magazine out from their guns, turns their safety on, and puts the bullets on the table. Mr. Alexander doesn't like this game, but that's the safest that he can make it. Afterwards, we find out that a little bit before the second round of quick draw, Miss O'Malley's pulling the magazine of her gun in and out, in and out. And Mr. Alexander again has to tell Miss O'Malley to please be safe with her gun, to stop. This was right before the second round of quick draw, remember. The gun had been empty before that. But perhaps Miss O'Malley is the reason that it got loaded again.
We move on to the second round of quick draw, and right before that, Mr. Green and Miss O'Malley, excuse me, Mr. Green and Miss Collins come outside and beeline towards Miss O'Malley. Mr. Green starts to bully Miss O'Malley, starts trying to egg her into playing quick draw. Mr. Alexander's there. Mr. Alexander steps in, tells her to stop, tells him not to play this game, tries to again cut off Mr. Green, and goes inside. A plaintiff told you that Mr. Alexander went inside while Miss O'Malley was holding a gun in her hand while they were positioned to play quick draw. Everything else that we heard about Mr. Alexander is that every time something unsafe was going on with the gun, he stepped in. But when it's convenient for them, all of a sudden he chooses not to. We know that Mr. Green and Miss O'Malley chose to ignore Mr. Alexander's constant warnings. They squared up to play quick draw. They pulled their guns. Miss O'Malley stopped for a minute. Then Miss O'Malley pointed her gun. She took the time to point that gun at Mr. Green. The shot went off and went into Mr. Green's chest. Plaintiff also told you that there's no way Mr. Alexander couldn't have known that Miss O'Malley and Mr. Green were drunk when all this happened, that he turned his back on two drunk people. Now, after today's trial, we know that both Mr. Green and Miss O'Malley were in fact drunk. But Miss Collins told us that even she, Miss O'Malley's best friend of 30 years, had no idea whether or not Miss O'Malley was drunk that day. I want to talk about the intoxication of Mr. Green and Miss O'Malley, actually. Just me. Now we know that Mr. Green had 3 times the legal limit of alcohol in his system. The alcohol that he had taken without being offered, the alcohol that he had drank away from the lodge. Now he had THC that Mr. Alexander never brought to the party. And Miss O'Malley, we know that Miss O'Malley was at 0.222%. That she was also near triple times the legal limit. Mr. Alexander had no idea of this. I want to talk to you about the burden of proof in today's trial. Plaintiff did correctly mention that they do have a burden. It's not quite the way they mentioned. See, we start with 0 burden at the start of this trial. Plaintiff is the only one with the burden when we start. Now, if they reach this tipping point where their story starts to become a little bit believable, we have 2 affirmative defenses that we've brought here. Now, once we reach that point, that's when our affirmative defenses start to be considered. That's when they start to push against the story being brought to you, the tale that plaintiff is telling you. And every single detail that we bring that points that Mr. Green and Miss O'Malley were acting negligently that day, that pushes against any sort of ground they've gained. I want to talk about the laws in today's case, and we're actually talking about a few laws here. First, we're going to talk about the premises liability law. It's not that one on the screen, if you don't mind turning off the screen share. The premises liability law basically attributes that if you are the owner of a land and you don't act as you are supposed to, as a reasonable owner of land would, then you can become liable under that. We heard today that not only was Mr. Green not invited, he wasn't a guest, so that law doesn't even apply. Even if he had been a guest, Mr. Alexander, he tried to cut Mr. Green off twice. He tried to get Mr. Green to go inside. He warned Mr. Green not to participate in the quick draw round, and he was ignored. I want to move on to the second law here, and that's the Dram Shop Act. Now, the Dram Shop Act was talked about a little by the plaintiff. I want to talk to you about a few parts that they missed. So under the Dram Shop Act, Section 3, if you'll go to the next page, says an intoxicated person who is injured does not have an action against the person who served or otherwise provided him or her the alcohol. Basically what that says, if somebody who is drunk is hurt
and is hurt, then they don't have an action against the person who served or provided them the alcohol. Now, we know that Mr. Green was intoxicated. He was 3 times the legal limit, and he had THC in his system. The Dram Shop Act clearly says he has no action against my client, Mr. Alexander. Additionally, Section 5 says a person serving or otherwise providing alcohol to a visibly intoxicated person is barred from recovering under Section 3. Now, we know that Mr. Green, thanks to Ms. Collins, served a glass of liquor for himself and for Ms. O'Malley minutes before Mr. Green's death. We also know that Ms. O'Malley was also intoxicated, near 3 times the legal limit. Again, Mr. Green, plaintiff, is barred from bringing a claim under Section 5. Section 3 and Section 5 bar anything against my client, Mr. Alexander. I want to talk about the jury instructions that you're going to receive as well. These jury instructions lead to some questions. First question asks, do you want to go to the first question? Did the negligence of any of the parties below approximately cause the death of Mr. Green? Basically says if the negligence of any of the people listed, which is going to be Mr. Alexander, Ms. O'Malley, and Mr. Green, caused Mr. Green's death. Can you answer yes or no? For Mr. Alexander, we've heard all the steps that Mr. Alexander took, the multiple steps throughout the entirety of the day, and we've looked at the law. Mr. Alexander, you're going to put no. And for Mr. Green and Ms. O'Malley, yes. I wouldn't be my job if I didn't take us to question 2, and that's why I'm going to talk about question 2. Now, question 2 asks you to attribute a percentage of negligence to the 3 parties. Now it's going to be again, Mr. Alexander, Mr. Green, and Ms. O'Malley. So this total number of percentages needs to equal 100%. You can put 0 for a person and leave the rest of the 100 between the other 2. I submit to you today that Mr. Alexander is 0% liable for what happened at the lodge that weekend. Now, if you tell me I just can't get behind that, it was his lodge, I feel like I need to do something. I submit to you that the maximum is 10%. That leaves 90% remaining between Mr. Green and Ms. O'Malley. We heard the negligent actions of both those people today. But I want to talk about the end a little bit. Both of them decided to play quick draw despite the warnings. But Ms. O'Malley was the one who pointed a gun at Mr. Green. She is the reason that the gun was aimed in the direction of Mr. Green's chest. And for that reason, I propose to you that Mr. Green get 40% and Ms. O'Malley get 50%. Now, plaintiff's gonna come back on the screen in a few seconds. And again, they're gonna point the finger, tell you that we just brought excuses and distractions. But don't forget, it was Ms. O'Malley who pointed the gun that ended Mr. Green's life that day.
Hargis, rebuttal.
Your Honor. That was their last chance, folks. That was their last chance to get up here and take responsibility for Bill Green's death, and they still refused to do so. And after that closing, it is crystal clear that all they want you to focus on is the shooting itself. They want you to see this as a criminal murder trial, but you can't do that because we're not across the street at the criminal courthouse. We're in the civil courthouse, and this is a negligence case. Ms. Sanchez said something very interesting. She said Mr. Alexander made his property the safest he could make it. Safest he could make it by letting the guests keep drinking, by letting the guests continue to play with real guns while they're drunk, by leaving the ammunition out on the picnic table, by leaving the guns out on the picnic table, by leaving the alcohol out on the picnic table where all his guests are, and by walking away when Bill Green and Chris O'Malley are about to have a quick draw contest. Safest he could make it, according to defense counsel, but apparently not according to Mr. Alexander, because what's the first thing he does after Bill Green is shot? He panics and grabs the guns and goes and hides them inside. It doesn't take the chief of police to know that guns aren't toys, and just because he's the chief of police doesn't mean he can't be held accountable. And it's your job to hold him accountable today. Thank you.
That is the end. I don't think there's a rebuttal, so great job, y'all. This was really good and fun, and y'all did a superb job. Why don't you give the scoring judges over here a moment to fill out their paperwork, and we'll have you back in. I'm sure they'll have lots of great things to say.
Thank you, Judge.
All right. Okay, so just a couple of things. First of all, I think you all did a great job. And it's obvious how much work that you all have put into this. Your performances were excellent. And so I have no doubt that as the semester continues, that you all will get better and better. So I look forward to seeing you again competing at the end of the semester, because it's just awesome. You were really all very good. So here's a round of applause for you. So anything I say is just to kind of help maybe frame some arguments or to, I usually say help you in the next round, but there's no next round in this issue or problem. So a lot of the specifics will kind of be irrelevant for the future, but maybe some style might be helpful. So if I were calling O'Malley, okay, I would have put her on the stand. I would have said, tell me your name. She'd say Chris O'Malley, and then I would just get it right out, right there. Okay, let's get this out of the way. You pointed a loaded gun and green, and you shot him. It kind of takes away from the defendant standing up and saying that exact thing. You already did it. And then I would go backwards. I would say, now let's go back and find out how and why you were put in this position, or how you found yourself there. Kind of like saying there's another third party kind of saying, implicating. You guys had evidence.
Yes,
Yes.
Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Really? Because I would have missed that.
Oh.
Your objection on those two reports was hearsay. And you need to learn how to put down a business records predicate, because it isn't, is this true and accurate? So if you had said hearsay, it would have been sustained and it would have been out. But even more than that, I'm not sure why you put the toxicology report in, because by putting that number in front of the jury, you just identified visibly intoxicated. No one is 0.23 or 0.22 and not visibly intoxicated. I wasn't real sure why you didn't put it into evidence.
I had it on my plan, but it had already been admitted or introduced.
Then why did you object to it?
Because I was planning on using it in my conversation with Mo Valdez.
Okay. Again, I'm confused. I would never, as the defendant, put that into evidence, because I think it started right there. And I would have put that report in my case in chief if I could have. And if not, I would have put it in with the officer and said 0.22. I mean, and just, I would have been closing, visibly intoxicated. No one is not visibly intoxicated at 0.22. So, and going as to who admitted and who didn't, explain to me why you wanted to keep the recall out.
Your Honor, I think it was because we feared that it would detract from the fact that there was negligence on behalf of Mr. O'Malley or Miss O'Malley, if there was the reasoning that, oh, there was a recall on the gun and that's why the shot went off.
It totally distracts from the fact that your client had anything to do with it. I would have laid it all on the recall. His deposition, O'Malley's deposition, it's a borrowed gun. He doesn't have familiarity with the gun. And then on top of that, it recalls and goes off by himself, and then you have that forensic report there that kind of says, yeah, the sucker goes off with the safety on. Remember, the only thing you have to do is find no negligence on your client. You don't care who else is, yes. And something you should remember in negligence charges, it's possible that it could be no, no, and no. So if it's a recall, it's no, no, and no, it's the gun's fault. So I was really shocked, and I tried to go with you. I'm like, you want to keep the recall out? Okay, I thought that was the biggest piece of evidence the defense had when I read the problem. That and the borrowed gun. And nobody talked about that. When they talked about the suspicion, you were arrested for suspicion of homicide, I think it was said. Okay, you needed to object because he was never convicted of the charge. That would have been sustained. In fact, I think that's kind of important enough where it should have been in motion and limited. Yeah, and here's another thing, Ms. Bauer, don't let anyone ever put a podium in front of you.
Yes, sir.
You stand up and you say, excuse me, Your Honor, I can't see the witness. Don't let anybody ever do that to you.
Yes, sir.
You know, he moved on directed verdict for your failure to show that he was visibly intoxicated. In the real world, that would have been granted. Because I don't remember, did you all ever remember them saying during their case in chief that he was visibly intoxicated? And that was your burden. I would have asked Collins when Collins was on the witness stand, did O'Malley, in your opinion, was O'Malley visibly intoxicated? Yeah, there, and also too, when you are on cross-examination, yeah, objection non-responsive is your friend. Especially like with the officer here, objection non-responsive would have shut him down. I even kind of hinted it for you. Answer the question. Objection non-responsive. You need to control a witness like that. Also too, you know, when he said he didn't remember the testimony of one of the witnesses, I might have gone after him a little bit on that. I would have gone like, you know, officer, you were just tendered as an expert in police work, which requires investigation and listening to witnesses and things of that nature. Yet you can't talk to us about what happened in this courtroom an hour ago. I also think whoever pointed out the fact that the chief signed the report, I would have done that. I would have put that on the Elmo. I would have highlighted it. Yeah, that's putting the fox in charge of the hen house. And I might have said something like that. I was trying to, somebody asked a question, were the people there getting intoxicated of the chief? Who asked that question?
I must have, Your Honor.
Okay, and I think you objected speculation, and I told you to put a foundation in. Do I have the party right?
Correct.
Okay, so here's how you would lay that foundation. As part of your position as chief of police, you investigate DWIs on a regular basis. You see lots of folks who are intoxicated. Part of your job is to be familiar with the signs and symptoms of intoxication. Were the people there at the party getting drunk? But you did do a great job getting over the hearsay objection on the $35. I thought that was great.
Thank you.
Good job. And somebody made a hearsay objection, it was you, Mr. Hargis, I think, and Mr. Anderson was testifying on the witness stand as to what he said. It is not a hearsay objection if the witness is actually testifying based on personal knowledge and is on the witness stand. Any witness can testify to what they said and or did. Okay, so here is my favorite on his cross-examination. Who had Anderson? Oh, you, Mr. Hargis, you had Anderson. So when he said that he walked away when he started pointing at the gun at each other because it made him feel uncomfortable. Oh, I love that. And you almost kind of didn't hear it. I said, I would have confirmed. So it made you feel uncomfortable, is that correct? Because anytime a gun is pointed at someone, it's possible that someone could die, okay? Yet you walked away. You knew Chris was drunk. You knew that Bill was drunk. And you knew that they were pointing guns at each other. And two drunks drawing guns and pointing them at each other, what do you think is going to happen? Just tell the story. You don't even have to wait for an answer sometimes. And then I probably would have followed up with something like, so you're the chief of police and you did nothing other than tell them to stop it. Aware of this dangerous situation, and all you did was tell them to stop it and walk away. And listen, Mr. Hargis, if you ever have to be on Zoom again, find a way to give your closing argument standing up. That's it. But generally, I thought you guys did great. I mean, I'm used to be pretty aggressive on cross. I mean, it doesn't have to be long. You just need to make your point. And basically, cross really isn't about the answers they're given. It's the story you're going to tell in your questions in front of the jury. So, and controlling yes or no. Ready to go next?
Sure, okay. Well, I concur with everything the judge said and also concur with the fact that you guys did a beautiful job. So congratulations to everyone. Superb job. Congratulations to your coaches. I was super impressed. I saw the, in full disclosure, saw the defense on Friday. But as I teach mock trial and coach mock trial, I try not to let those things influence my scoring or anything like that. But I made this comment, and that is, you know, I was super impressed with you guys on Friday, even more impressed with everyone tonight. And it really bothers me because I have to South Texas and you guys are doing so well. So anyway, with that, I will try to go as quickly as I can. And I'm going to time myself so I won't waste too much time. Okay, so my critiques are going to be more basic than your honors. So just take them wherever you take. First issue, introductions, Brett. I would not introduce your partner, and I would not introduce your partner as speaker number 2, okay? And I wouldn't introduce your partner, especially if that's your on Zoom. So, you know, speaker number 1 should introduce herself. You should also do the housekeeping. That will give you an opportunity to warm up your voice, okay? Brett should handle motions and limine, but, you know, while he's doing motions and limine, you can get your head straight for opening statements. But you need some warm-up time. And I think you were denied that, how you guys structured the introduction. Defense, very clean introduction, so good job. Motions limited. Motions limited to plaintiff, granted, 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 okay? Sounds bad, sounds like you're losing, it's a gift. Okay, so a academic rule in mock trial is if they kill you in motions in limine, kill them in offers of proof. If it's important enough for you to, I don't know if it makes sense, getting the rules. But anyway, you know, you wanted to get this stuff out. If the other side wants to get it in, there's an offer of proof opportunity. Okay. Moving on, binder. I don't like that trick. That's a St. Mary's trick. I said that Friday. If there's a binder that's being shown to the judge, you want to see it. Okay, so you don't know what's in that binder. Make sure you check it out. Podium, lose the podium. You guys don't need it. Okay, it's a crutch. So lose it on opening statement, lose it on all of your examinations. Plaintiff's opening, lose the podium. Good story, very vivid. You had to listen to the evidence, listen to the witness, listen to the law. Good triplet. What I'd like to see is a little bit more movement and some more positional assignment. Okay, so use the well, assign all the bad facts to the defense side of the courtroom, assign all the good facts to your side, and assign the most important stuff that you're going to say in the center of the well. You basically sat there or stood there next to the podium. So move around. Another issue is slow it down. So keeping names straight, keeping issues straight, that's difficult. If you're going quick, it's hard for us to digest. So slow it down. Defense opening, great inflection, got a great voice, beautiful voice. Lost the podium, so good job. You weren't using that as a crutch, so good for you. Don't know if I like seeing you do the quick draw as the defense. So, just think about your side and kind of the physicality and things that you're doing, and call the ball there. But you were very big, with your body and with your movements. In a courtroom of this size and with this distance, that's appropriate. If you're here, that's too small, it's too unnoticeable. You were very big, and so that was appreciated. Okay, actions, choices, decisions, another great triplet. Just get the order right. So choose, decide, act. Okay. Plaintiff, direct examination of witness number 1. Good classic direct examination, who, what, where, when, why, how. Great job. There was a speculation objection. Judge asked you to lay foundation. You did it. Good job. Super clean. You had great signposting and good roofing. So I think from a direct standpoint, it was very, very good. There were a lot of questions that were the did, can, could, would, might, may, should questions that call for a yes or no response. But you never got an objection non-responsive, even though the witness gave you more than the question called for. So that's okay, but just be mindful of the non-responsive questions. Cross-examination. Okay, so, good job. Sponsor, correct me if I'm wrong, but, there was this question about you're the sponsor, and correct me if I'm wrong. It got a little snarky, so, watch the attitude a little bit. You believe in free will. You knew the answer that you were going to get, right? I mean, you knew you were going to get a fight to that question, but I actually kind of liked it because it was a question that got my attention. So, good job. Okay. Next direct, good. I mean, all the directs were super clean. There was an objection, speculation, lay foundation, and this was on the issue of upset, and you didn't circle back. Okay, so when the judge says, sustain, please lay some more foundation, you got to show that you can do that. There was a hearsay objection, and your response was, I can move on. Okay, so move on, I can move on. That's code for I'm losing. Don't concede. Just try to find another way to get it in. Okay, so evidence was a bit shaky for you on direct, and just something we need to work on. Okay, cross-examination. So there was an impeachment by contradiction. You did it. It was clean. What I liked about it was that after that, every single time you went back to, have you ever made a statement of the contrary? You were controlling the witness. She wouldn't fight you. So it really demonstrated your ability to control. And so for that, it was good. The answer was, well, that's not the only thing she tried. That answer also helped you. So I don't know that, substantively you needed to impeach there, but you did, and it allowed you to further control the case, so that was good. Okay, watch attitude on judges' rulings. So there was a objection to hearsay. Your response was present sense impression, and just your delivery of that to the judge, to me, seemed a bit like you were upset with it. J-Mall, make sure that that's done outside the presence of the jury. The response to that needs to be an appellate brief. So, there was plenty of evidence of X, but you didn't list any evidence, right? So you gotta kind of attack those issues. Okay, direct to Valdez. Good looping, good signposting, good drama. Thought it was really good drama. I mean, it's interesting. I was really interested in the directs this time, which is interesting. Cross, Georgia. I think this was your best performance. So all the components that you handled, I thought your cross was very good. Spouting off. I think, the witness gave you that answer and you kind of just moved on. I think that was a good answer that you could have run with, but on paper, your cross was pretty much flawless. So good job. Okay, direct of Jane, Alex, the chief by Ms. Sanchez. Good directs, good sit down question. So really appreciate, your recency, your promising recency. Your sit down was super strong. Cross by Brett. Loved the kiss. Keep it short and simple, stupid. Okay. So Brett, you had a very good moment in your cross where it was the kind of Monica's and Vinny, keep it short and simple, stupid. Alcohol is dangerous. Guns are dangerous. Alcohol and guns, more dangerous. Alcohol, guns, and intoxicated person, deadly. And just, bouncy, all that issue, the way that you handled it, it was very, very good. Good listening. You listened to the direct examination and you brought some of those issues back in your cross, which was very, very good and very effective, but you got a bit repetitive. So watch that. Your cross was going great, and then you wanted to repeat all your great hits, and then it got kind of repetitive. Okay. Sitting here today, you take zero responsibility. Excellent sit down question. Good job. Okay, plaintiff close. Good, clean, got the charge, you explained it. Great job. Was it reasonable? And then you had this litany of, was it reasonable that, X, Y, Z. Thought that was really, really good, okay? But then your list just kept going. And your list got so long that I felt like, I don't know. It's now I'm doing your job, okay? You're making the point, you're making me think, but your list just kind of went on a little bit too long. So, pick your best up. Defense close, lose the podium, it's a crutch, you don't need it. What we say is not evidence. Absolutely true. Judge will give an instruction on that. I never say that. Okay. If I have credibility with the jury, I want them thinking that what comes out of my mouth is evidence. And if you stand up and say, what I say is not evidence, my response to that is, great, I can stop listening. So I wouldn't say that, judge is gonna say that for you. I would just cruise right past that. THC, maybe he smoked a joint too. Great job. Okay, so that's taking, a bit of evidence. There was no testimony on that, but it's in evidence. And you took it and you made an argument. So great job. Great job with the charge. Rebuttal. Good job. You've got a great kind of folksy plaintiff's, flair to you, which is good, and I appreciate that. But the first words out of your mouth was last chance to take responsibility. But they didn't do that. They did put up 10%. Am I right on that? Yeah. So, your rebuttal kind of just immediately from the word go, kind of fell a little bit flat because they put up 10%. And I think if you'd come back and said, that's something, but that's not enough, and argued that, your rebuttal would have been more fair. Overall, super impressed, guys. Great job. Congratulations, and I'll show up.
Thank you.
Would like to go next?
I can go next. I'm gonna keep mine really short. And I'm kind of the appellate lawyer in the room, so I don't have as big a problem with podium because that's usually where we're making our arguments, from a podium with a light on. But I thought y'all did a fantastic job. The things that I would point out is, I don't have the benefit of having seen this scenario before. I did kind of scan through the materials ahead of time, know what the case was about, but the plaintiff side, I don't think you kind of told the story and what your theory is for why the defendant is liable in this case. That story could have been told much better at the front end. The closing argument did a fantastic job of that, I thought. But from the start of it, you needed to give the jury more of a roadmap where you're going with this. Why is this defendant liable to you? And that kind of leads me to your opening argument, Georgia, right? So it was a little bit flat, a little lacking in energy. And you're the plaintiff. You're the one with the burden of proof. You're the one here accusing somebody of wrongdoing. You're asking this jury to hold liable. And so you need a little more energy, I think, when you're standing up as the plaintiff, giving their opening statement. So that could have been a little more energetic. So opening by the defense, I thought it was very good. Both of you guys have excellent, mannerisms. Use body language really well. Karina, I think it is. You must have a background in like theater or something. You kind of dramatize things, and that's good. The one thing I would kind of criticize about some of that was you made some dramatic points, and then it's kind of like, well, what does that mean? Where are you going with that? You kind of make the point and just kind of leave it out there, and the jury's going, well, yeah, that was very dramatic. But what does that tell me? What am I supposed to do with that? So there were several places where it just sort of had a loose end, where you made a good point, you zeroed in on something, but you didn't know why you zeroed in on it. What does that really tell us about the case? Another part on the defense side was you did a real good job of pinning blame on O'Malley. The one thing I would kind of criticize about that approach is, of course, O'Malley killed the guy. Everybody knows it's uncontested, and really what you need to focus on was the lack of culpability in your client in that. Of course, that guy killed him. Everyone knows that he killed him. So everyone did a great job, I thought, on direct and on cross-examination. I got to give all your props. Jordan, you did a fantastic job with that. I thought when you did your direct, it was just fantastic. You did an outstanding job. Everybody did a good job with the direct and cross, I thought. Closing arguments. Brett, you did a fantastic job with that. That was, we need a little bit more of that in the opening just to kind of get the theming going. But I thought you did a fantastic job with that. Defense did a great job with that too. The one thing I'd say is a little too much focus on O'Malley and not enough on the defendant's lack of culpability. And one thing about this whole problem that was a little confusing to me is looking at the packet, it indicates that this is exclusively a statutory cause of action. The common law is abolished, and then the jury's asked 2 common law negligence questions. I found that kind of confusing. I was thinking, you need to be focusing on whether they were visibly intoxicated and whether the results were reasonably foreseeable, not so much on negligence, but the questions were negligence, so you pretty much had to. So overall, excellent job, guys. I was very impressed.
Thank you. Next.
Me to go?
Yes.
I'm gonna set my watch because I have a tendency to over talk, and I know it's almost 6 o'clock, so.
At what point comment? Do you want a warning?
I'm giving myself 5 minutes and I might take a little overage. Okay, real quick, here's some big picture things. On evidence, evidence, there are a lot of lawyers who've been in this courtroom for 30 years who still don't know evidence very well. And if I can say so, there are a handful of judges who don't either. But not these.
What was your name again?
Well, I won't go on about that. So when you're preparing, every question you're going to ask, if you think it's going to potentially draw an objection, figure out your response. What is your response going to be? And if the judge rules against you, how are you going to get there in the alternative? Just about every question that's going to draw something like that after what's your name and where do you live, you have to think about that and be ready for it. Pencil it in the margins of your outline. Same with documents, of course. If you're offering something, is it a business record? Is the person testifying about it can say, yeah, that looks like the gun. Those sorts of questions as well. That comes with a little bit more of the experience in dealing with evidence. On your themes, and I'm used to seeing this now, having judged these things a handful of times. You always stand up and suggest sort of what's the theme. Think about what the jury is ready to buy and identify the theme that's going to match what they're ready to buy. You're not going to persuade them. You're going to get them to accept something that they're already willing to accept. So there was a great theme built into the plaintiff's case in the record. And you got to it about halfway, I'd say. I'm not saying there's only one theme to the case by any means. But everyone would agree that guns and alcohol are not a good combination, right? How do you respond to that? How do you disagree with that? So make something like that your theme. And then you've got your defendant who provided you that theme. So you can use it in your opening, you can use it during the presentation of the evidence, and you can use it in the closing. And that's what a good theme does, is it presents something that the jury is ready to accept, and then it runs through the entire case. For the defendant, I didn't really think up one real quick off the top of my head. I didn't have a chance to spend a lot of time reading the record here to see what else might be in there. The defendant's theme was O'Malley pointed the gun and shot the person. Yeah, okay. But maybe something more like, grown adults should be responsible, for their own conduct. And let me tell you what happened. Something that gets your defense into the theme. Okay, so on the opening, that was Georgia, right? On the plaintiffs, yeah. I don't know again if it's a trial advocacy competition thing, but it seems to me that the lawyers always start way too far away from the jurors. So unless there's some 3-point line that you have to stay outside of, I would suggest that you move in a little bit closer. John Henry did a good job of moving in closer as the opening began. Started out a little too far away. That was, something I took note of, but I don't see any reason why you should move a little bit closer to us than where you started out. Georgia, good preview of the things we were supposed to be, making note to look out for. And I think that can be really effective in an opening statement. I worked with a guy who everyone would agree was one of the great trial lawyers in Texas for a number of years. And he would say, I'm going to tell you what you have to watch out for. And what he was saying was, don't trust these people on the other side. Now, you can't do it that way unless you're that guy. But there are ways to sort of, alert, watch out for this, whether it's for us or whether it's for them. And so good job of sort of previewing that. On the defense opening, I already mentioned the one thing that Mr. Wilson did. The other thing, I thought you did a really good summary at the end, or not really a summary, but a description of sort of what we're going to do with comparative fault here. I can't remember quite how you put it, but then that didn't really run through the presentation of the evidence and the closing. But that's really what you're trying to do here. I think if you got Alexander at 49%, you win, right? And so emphasizing that at the beginning was good, but then it didn't carry through at the closing, you know. Though you did a good job at the closing with the reviewing the jury charge questions. I know I'm running over my self-imposed limit already. Mr. Hargis, you raised the motion in limine about the drinking problem. That, you know, was sort of overruled because it was a slightly different issue. But in the real world, it can be effective after the fact to raise the violation of the motion in limine, because it's a way of saying to the judge, look, we've got to keep an eye on this guy. You know, there are some lawyers who think the only reason for the motion in limine is to know what I have to get in on the other side, on the losing end of the motion. And so when somebody's prone to do that, you have to call them out, not necessarily in front of the jury, but as you go along, so that you and the judge doesn't keep detailed track of what's in the motion in limine rulings the way you should. So interesting thing that you did there. And your present tense questioning was good. People will say that that draws people more into the story than talking about something having happened in the past. So Brett, that was another good one for you. Mr. Wilson on the cross-examination. Now I've seen you more than one time, having judged this a few times. And this is a little bit of a criticism. You looked a little bit like you were acting, a little bit too much drama. And it's because you're getting better and better and more confident. Just be, on your examination over here, I didn't see any of that. But in one of them, I thought you were coming off a little bit maybe over dramatic or cocky. So just be cautious about that. And as I said, it's because I think you're getting even better and more confident in what you're doing, but don't get too carried away with that. Those charges were dropped, weren't they? That thing about Alexander. What was the point of all that? I mean, what was the point of that? That was something that was new to me. The first time I heard it was here. I didn't read it in advance. So what were you saying?
It was my attempt to get around the MIL, the settlement, and to just kind of raise suspicion to the jury that this specific witness has bias, has motive to testify. But we just didn't flesh it out like we should have.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna jump past a lot of stuff and try and wrap up here. There was pretty good impeachment. I think it was by you, Ms. Sanchez, on Pat Collins.
I believe so.
But it was sort of inconsequential, you know. So only impeach people on stuff that's really important. And it's one way in trial competition perhaps to show that you know how to do it, but it's not really making an impact. It's sort of like, oh yeah, okay. And the trial consultants will tell witnesses, yeah, just buy that. That's absolutely what I said in my deposition. And then the jurors are really confused about why you did it in the first place. So do it when it really makes a good point. Some of you have this tick of saying, at this time, we offer this. At this time, we have our motion in limine. I think at this time is something that you can eliminate from your vocabulary. Ms. Bauer, your cross-examination, I agree, was very good. This was of Officer Valdez. but it was a little monotone, you know? I mean, you were kind of ticking off the points, making really good points, but the style points, I'd say, you know, better on, but the substance was outstanding. And you got in the alcohol and guns are not a good combination, which is one of those themes that could be carried through all the way. Okay, and then just one other point rather than all the little ones. Don't leave it to the jurors to figure out what the heart of the case is. And I see this, you know, in the real world, and I have to fight against it myself, and I see it in these competitions. You're not just here to get all the evidence in and give a long list of the negligence or the long list of why it wasn't negligence. Really get to the heart of the case. You know, what one or two or three things make it undeniable that Alexander's responsible for this. You know, he filled the cabin with alcohol and lit the match. You know, and Judge Roth made the point of a few of those things where she was saying, what's the real point here? Why were you, you know, instead of a list of half a dozen things or a dozen things, get to the two or three, maybe make the whole list, but then say, this is what I really can't get over. You shouldn't be able to get over either. And really give them the thing that when they go back into the jury room, they just keep coming back to, whether it's the plaintiff's case or the defendant's case. And don't just leave it to the jurors to sort of assemble all of the evidence and decide what, you know, what's going to make or break it. So, okay, that's all I got.
Thank
Sorry
you.
for running over.
Last but not least, very briefly, I agree with most everything everybody said. As we're moving off of Zoom back into in-person competitions and trials and everything else, think about when you're out there, you're on, right? So in the, you know, in the past, if we could just, you know, you just saw your little head in the screen, but when opposing counsel is talking, Georgia, and they're opening, you don't care. You know, you're over there planning what you're doing next. So take notes, you know, don't sit there and listen like until they're like, oh, wow, great. Defense. I didn't know who the defendant was, and this is the person who's on trial. So put him at the end of the table, you know, and John Henry walk over, like, this is kind of like a criminally sort of trial, like touch him, you know, like he doesn't have leprosy, we like this guy, you know, and like just make it, it's about this man, especially if you're gonna be so dramatic. Another thing too, John Henry, you gotta be careful when you have somebody like Laura up on the stand, because if she would have gone baby seal whenever you were being all dramatic, you would look like the biggest jerk ever. And that's what I was hoping for you to just roll over and be like, but it's hard for me too, you know, because he was being such a dramatic jerk. There was a moment where he just made him look really, really crappy. Next time.
Yeah, let's hope not.
Kind of better baby feel out.
Hey, Georgia, everything you did was so thoughtful. All you gotta do is 3 things. You gotta move with intention. You gotta add some voice inflections, and don't be scared just because you're on this team with all these people who've done this before. I mean, you did great. Karina, I have a note for you about the drama as well, especially on direct. I mean, I love that you do this, but at the same time, direct is about the witness, right? And so there are times when you do wanna like ask a question to the jury and look at us, you know, stare into our souls and make sure we got it. But then there are other times when you just want to let your witness go. And I felt like on direct, I forgot who it was at this point. I felt like you were more the star. Okay, this is the last note I have for everybody. Halfway through your prep, take a step back, and this is what we do with my teams. We have a meeting about why. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? So I think especially like halfway through the prep, we're all believing our own BS at this point. And there are just some things that we got into that I don't know why they mattered, like the Jen impeachment, and I was like, okay. And everything felt real long to me. I don't know. For me, I like 3 or 4 maybe 5 big points with every witness and just get in, get out as quick as we can do it. Especially when you're defense team. But everybody did a really good job.
Thank you.
Hey, really done. So the part that y'all been waiting for. Gail's like, oh. Yeah, I know, it's been a very, very long day, but you know, it's worth it, you guys in the finals, that's huge. So first, I thought I had 2 bottles of gin, but I think I drank one of them, so that's why it's vodka. But it is the official Hicks Thomas death match. I don't see any witness in the final round because I was lectured by my colleague AJ Polito at St. Mary's that everybody wants more awards. So, and what's the point of asking the judges to rank the witnesses and we're not going to give this one the final round? So the outstanding witness for this final round goes to Tay. The outstanding attorney for the final round, Mr. Hargis. Good job, Roth. Who managed to tell you that even over Zoom, when everybody here, it still works and good advocacy.
Does he get a bottle of vodka too?
No, he's gonna get a gavel with his name engraved on it, because that's all of the outstanding attorney awards, that gavel, so good job, Brett. But really what y'all wanna know is who won the whole darn thing, because I make to do photos. The winning team is Death by Death. In split ballots, 'cause I don't want y'all to think y'all swept. Plaintiff did take a ballot with her, but congratulations, y'all, very, very sorry. All right, I'm gonna kill the live stream, because nobody's seen it more. Brett, good job, dude. We'll get a photo with your gavel later.
Am I supposed to stay for a photo too, or?
No, well, did I get a photo of you earlier with your team? Did you take a team photo with them?
Yeah, a really awkward FaceTime photo. We're good.
Okay, that's all you need. All right. See ya.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Brett.